Yeah, I see the YouTube video channel. It's looking good. Yeah.
Great.
Excellent. Okay, my name is Petter Støa. I'm with the SINTEF and with the openENTRANCE project. I have the pleasure of welcoming you to one of openENTRANCE workshops, scenarios for low carbon futures of the European energy system. And in my mind, this is really one of the important issues for Europe at the moment and in the coming years. We want to discuss or share kind of what we've been thinking about with you related to how to realize the Green Deal policy and how to reach our 2050 targets. So, and the discussion we hope can take place is between the modelers, how to kind of create the best pathways to this target, and with the policy makers, so that the policymakers actually can ask the researchers, modelers, the good questions about kind of how to get there, and that we can have an ongoing discussion in the year to come on kind of how to find the best pathway to the future we want to create. So so that'll be my kind of welcome to you. As you see, the objective of the workshop is quite more concrete than what I said initially. There has been constructed 4 scenarios and pathways, kind of to kind of make more also to describe in a more realistic and concrete manner how the 1.5 degree scenario can be reached, and also 2.0 scenario. It might be realistic or not, and we try to kind of stretch the axis a little bit. How can it be done by means of technology? How can the society itself do it? How can, you could say, very directed policies make it happen? And probably the solution lies somewhere in a combination of them. But how to combine them is an open question, and something that we as modelers would like to kind of show to the policymakers and have a good discussion about. So we want feedback on the energy transition pathways we'll be showing you. We want a discussion about what does this tell us, what's right, what's wrong with them, how can they be adjusted, and see kind of what other effects these scenarios might have that is not embedded in the modeling. And of course, part of the idea of openENTRANCE is that it's open. So we're putting it on the table, the analysis, some of the analysis tools the data so that others can kind of use their tools in order to quality assure or to have alternative views on the scenarios. I'll stop there and then give the word to Pedro Crespo del Granado, who has been really instrumental in putting this program together. Pedro.
Thank you, Peter. Yes, so we have developed a really nice program for today, where we're going to have divided in two parts. The first part, we're going to discuss, as Peter has mentioned, about some presentations on decarbonization pathways, the openENTRANCE latest results on our decarbonization pathways and this 3D concept of defining them. This will be with a panel discussion that we will together have a constructive discussion about how this relates to the EU Green Deal and other challenges and opportunities in decarbonizing the energy system. Then we will have a break, which is going to be a very interactive break, very where we will have some virtual tables and virtual chats for those who want to have more spontaneous discussions, as we would have if this would not be digital. And the second part is where we will focus on two really good macroeconomic models that are being used for European-wide assessment of policies. One from openENTRANCE, NTNU, and one from E3 modeling, and that focus on macroeconomic perspective. Follow a discussion, and again at the end, we will have an open coffee, virtual coffee, where we will have the option to go and have some chats with the speakers and other people that you might want to have a spontaneous discussion. I think as you can also be active on the chat. You can also please write anything constructive or feedback that you want to ask on the chat. We will collect these questions and we will raise these questions either on the panel or at the end of our presentation. So please use the chat, and thanks for coming. So now we start with the openENTRANCE project at a glance.
Yes, hello everyone. Can you hear me? Yes, thank you. Yeah, fine. My name is Ingeborg Gråbak. I'm from SINTEF Energy Research. I'm the coordinator of openENTRANCE, and I will present for you or give you an overall presentation of openENTRANCE and focus more about other aspects of the project and those you are going to dig into later today. openENTRANCE is the abbreviation for Open Energy Transition Analysis for a Low Carbon Economy. And the aim for openENTRANCE is on the next slide. If you go further, please, thank you. The aim is to develop, apply, and disseminate an open and integrated modeling platform designed to assess low carbon transition pathways in Europe. And on the next slide, you see the figure with the open platform, because the open platform contains, among other, or includes, among other, suites of modeling tools. Those tools are fully open with description, code, input data, and output data. So it's possible for anyone to run the models and build and develop them further. The models are linked, are soft linked in the way that output from one model is input to another. And one of the models you're going to hear more about later today is the GENeSYS-MOD, the energy system model, which we have used for developing the common energy scenarios per European country. Those scenarios are also fully open. All input and output data on country level for Europe towards 2050. We discuss this platform and also the analysis we do with this platform with what we call decision and policy makers. And this workshop today is a part of those discussions. So on the next slide, you can see more about the open platform. As I said, it's a suite of open modeling tools, the energy system model. Pedro mentioned one of our macroeconomic models, the relevance model, and we also have the XMOD model from TNO. So we have two macroeconomic models as a part of this platform. We have several investment models, for example, the Empire model and the TEPES models, which you can use for analyzing investments in transmission capacity and production capacity. There's also a modeling suite for the electricity system, the Plan for EU suite developed in the Plan for S project. And this includes also a capacity expansion model, but it's also a seasonal storage valuation tool, and finally a European operational dispatch model. We also have local models. So the models go from a pan-European level to a country level and to the single consumer level. For the single consumer, it's possible to analyze optimal charge and discharge of a local storage battery. These models are linked via data format and a nomenclature, which is developed in the project. This is also fully open available for anyone who wants to use it further, and for those who want to include more into the nomenclature than we have done so far. The open platform includes a scenario explorer, which is a database with all these European scenario data. It will also later include results from 9 case studies we are going to do, and also from the macroeconomic analysis. And later, it will also be possible for third parties to link their own models to this database. And if you go to the next slide, openENTRANCE is a consortium of 14 partners. You can see the map to the left and a list of the partners to the right. We started this project in May 2019 and will go on to April 2023. So we are a little bit more than 2 more years to work with this platform. And on the next slide, you can see our web page. So we hope you will go into this web page and read more about the project and follow us, because we will disseminate more information here when we achieve new milestones. You can also subscribe for our newsletter, and we also hope that you will follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter. On my last slide, I'm saying a little bit about openness in energy system modeling, because why is this so important? It's very cost efficient because researchers can build on what other researchers have done. For example, data gathering often take a lot of time in energy system modeling, but with projects like openENTRANCE, you can use what others have developed before. It improves the quality because people outside the consortium can assess what we have done and give us feedback, and that improves the quality. It also increases understanding of the results, since everything is open, every input data is open, and it's possible to, it's easier to understand what impact the results. And it also increases trust because you better understand what is behind the results. So trust is important, I think, for the further development of Europe towards a low carbon economy. And then openENTRANCE is developing this very strong open platform. And I think this openness give another strength to the analysis, a kind of muscles to the analysis, which is very important. So to other researchers, I would say, use this platform and give us feedback, suggest improvements. We will work, as I said, with it 2 more years, and your feedback will be very much welcomed. And also add your own resource to our platform and do comparative studies to what we have done. And to the Commission, I will encourage you to require openness in further energy modeling projects, because you have the strength to do this and to, as I say, add new muscles to energy system modeling. So with these words, I will say I will wish you hopefully a useful day, good discussions, and also pleasant conversations in the breaks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ingeborg. And I'd like to kind of repeat the last challenge by Ingeborg, that this is a platform that really is open. Also, the catch is that you have to kind of adhere to a certain format in the data when you describe the input and the output. But if you do that, you put your analysis and your results open for everybody to share and to look at and to compare with. So that's the challenge to remember. We are quite on time, I think, and I won't spend too much time in introducing the next speaker. I think he's a well-known person within the modeling community. We'll have 3 presentations. We will switch quite quickly between them. And starting, as I said, describing the scenarios is Professor Dr. Hans Auer from TU in Vienna. Please, Hans.
Okay, thank you, Petter. So I try to share my screen now.
Yeah.
Okay, so I hope it works.
It looks good. If you are able to make it in show mode, it will fill the whole screen, I think.
Just a moment. So now it should perfectly work.
Please go ahead. Fine.
Yeah. Okay, so thanks for your kind introduction, Petter. My name is Hans Auer, and I'm since more than 25 years with Technische Universität Wien, or Vienna University of Technology, and we are doing a lot of energy system analysis and modeling in this context. Now in the next 20 minutes, I will present the major highlights of our pan-European results on aggregated level of our low carbon scenarios. So I think it's very important at the beginning that we have a common understanding about these scenarios, so how to understand them. So they are based on the storyline approach. We developed this 3-dimensional approach. I will talk a little bit later on this. Today I present, let's say, the quantitative numbers based on our modeling exercise. So both reports can be found on the openENTRANCE website, where there are details about both of these, the storylines and what I present now in the next 20 minutes. So with our analysis, we comply to the 1.5 or in one a little bit more conservative scenario to the 2-degree global warming targets. So therefore, of course, we needed a number on the remaining CO2 budget, and this has been fixed by the IEM model message Globium. And then, of course, to achieve carbon neutrality in 2040 or 2050, in a little bit more conservative scenario. So we have determining parameters. So we have technologies, the availability or the anticipation when novel technologies, new technologies are available. And then, of course, our model determines also what the technology exchange rates need to be. And one of the triggering parameters is the CO2 price, finally, of course, linked to the remaining CO2 budget. And our results, so they are really ambitious, what I present right now, and maybe in real life. So we cannot imagine that this will happen or this can happen. But these scenarios, they show the necessity not only of the optimization model to find feasible solutions. So purely the analytical approach needs these results, but they also show us what is needed if we seriously intend to comply to these 1.5 or 2 degree targets. And as I said, so we must, let's say, reconsider our thinking, what's supposed to be possible, what's supposed to be feasible, and also financiable. So in terms of, let's say, technology exchange rates, in energy transition. And therefore, for instance, we have not used, intentionally not used the business as usual terminology anymore. So our most conservative storyline and then scenario, the gradual development, is even more what's supposed to be business as usual in the past. And as already mentioned before, so we developed here an open source model and a tool and then a platform. And for instance, this model, GENeSYS-MOD, which delivered these results today, so this can be seen as some kind of piano. It's fully open then for everybody, and everybody in the future can play on it and carry out own analysis. So this is very important to have this in mind. So here we see or Petter already has shown in the introduction, the storyline approach. So we opened 3 dimensions, so 3 driving forces, how our energy future could look like in Europe in the future. So on the one hand, we have technology, on the other hand, society, and the third dimension is policy. So the technology dimension more or less shows us, whether or not we have novelty, we have breakthrough of new technologies like CCS or other technologies, or commercial hydrogen production. And then in terms of society, the question is there an awareness, an attitude, so from the bottom up, so from the individuals or not, or do they need more, let's say, incentives on the other hand from the policy? And just an example how we developed these storylines, it's always the combination of 2 of these drivers. So if we, in front of us, if we have a look at the techno-friendly storyline, so this means that on the one hand, we have novel technologies, a breakthrough of CCS technologies, offshore floating wind turbines, large-scale hydrogen production, and so on. And on the other hand, society is also willing to accept and adapt. Also these using the benefits of the economies of scale, of large-scale production of these sustainable technologies. And finally here, for instance, the market delivers. So there is not a big or a significant need for the policies to provide incentives, to incentivize, to provide subsidies and so on. On the other hand, so for instance, the directed transition, here the market not necessarily delivers, you need more policy steering. And on the other hand, so the blue one, the societal commitment shows that on the one hand, society is willing to adapt, but we must rely rather on the technologies we have right now, and there is no significant breakthrough, and therefore, of course, policies need to implement also incentives that society adapts and implements very fast. And these 3 storylines, they comply to the 1.5 degree scenario and the gradual development. So in the middle is a little bit more conservative. So this is a little bit of each of them, and this complies to the 2 degree scenario. So this is the storyline approach we used, and based on them, we show then quantitative numbers. So I show here the flowchart of our modeling approach. I do not go into details, so this is not the aim now of this presentation. It shall just show that on the one hand we had a status quo of the GENeSYS-MOD model. So it was initially further developed from the osmosis project. So we had a status quo and we adapted it to our research questions and modeling needs here in openENTRANCE. The input scaling, of course, took into account to be also consistent and coherent with other studies, already existing work, so known modeling or known-European models, exercises, and also the World Energy Outlook. So to have some kind of comparability then also of our results. And we also made some kind of validation with our model GENeSYS-MOD with other models like message IX, and we took the most alike existing pathways and compared it. So these details can be, let's say, studied in the deliverable 3.1. You can download from the project website. I do not want to go further into the details because here it's also shown then how country-specific results in detail will be delivered later on in the project, and how the link to the open platform will be and so on. So as I said, so the tool, the piano, being available for the community, then fully open, is GENeSYS-MOD. On the left-hand side, we see the initial granularity on geographical level, and on the right-hand side, we see the status quo right now. Based on this granularity, we delivered now, let's say, the results, but I only present, let's say, the aggregated pan-European results. As I said, the country-specific ones, they will be delivered in 1 year or so. So we made, of course, many, or our colleagues from TU Berlin. So it's developed by TU Berlin. Carlo will also be one of the presenters later on. There have been made, of course, many improvements and adaptations in terms of functionalities and improvements also in terms of granularity. Here we see just a small list. So initially there have been time slices. Now it's replaced by hourly resolution and time clustering algorithm and so on. And many further disaggregations, so in terms of data in the different sectors, have been conducted, and it's very important to note that it's still ongoing work, of course. So notably in terms of country-specific input data settings. And also the functionality was extended, not only being able to model a CO2 budget, but also a carbon price mechanism. And we used, so for instance, for the directed transition, so this is the most policy steering scenario. We used still the CO2 budget approach, that we have a remaining CO2 budget, and finally the shadow price of the model in the optimization exercise shows us what's the expected the CO2 price we need finally to trigger the technology switch or exchange rates. And now I already come to a few highlights of our results. So as I said, we have 4 different, let's say, clusters of quantitative scenario results. I will go through a little bit more in detail the societal commitment and present for the remaining 3, let's say, a little bit more the unique properties then of the remaining ones. So here we see on the left-hand side that, of course, we have to significantly reduce primary energy use until 2050. So it has to be reduced to around 50%. And of course, that we have to decarbonize significantly. And on the left-hand side, we see that we have to phase out from all the fossils. The red one is gas, and we see that we use in 2040 still a little bit of gas, but finally that's it, more or less. And the future, let's say, primary fuels are solar, wind, and of course a few others. this is what we see here. And on the right-hand side, we see the corresponding development of the emissions in the different sectors. And as I already said, if we want to comply to the 1.5 degree scenario, this more or less means that we need net zero emissions more or less already in 2040. So this is in 19-20 years from now on, in order to comply to our goals. And then here we see from the societal commitment scenario the electricity generation technologies, the further development. So electricity generation will more or less double compared to the status quo right now. And of course, increasingly, the fractions of wind, onshore, offshore will increase. And in societal commitment, of course, also solar PV significantly. And here, solar PV shows both utility scale, but also local self-consumption, so in energy communities, for instance. And of course, we are proving continuously our not only the model, but also result presentation. And in the final version, we also will show here, for instance, in the yellow color, the solar PV generation split into utility scale and self-generation, so in energy communities and for prosumers. And then we have, of course, on country level, the different fractions of electricity generation. And this societal commitment scenario, this also shows a possible future world. So it's not a prediction. So this is very important to correctly understand storylines. So we do not say this storyline and the corresponding scenario is or will come more probable than another one. But in this storyline, so we have set the constraints to the model that we completely phase out from nuclear. But this is the only one. So this is a model setting that we expect from the model in 2050 to phase out. But of course, the remaining ones, they still have nuclear. We also continuously take into account the ongoing policies. For instance, France now officially has announced that there will be a lifetime extension of nuclear power plants for another 10 years. And this is what we already anticipated, let's say, a few months ago when we delivered and calculated these results. In the remaining ones, this is already implemented. And then here I show the results in the different sectors. On the left-hand side, the residential sector and the industry sector. We see that we here also significantly phase out from gas until 2040, 2045. And in the residential sector, we will increasingly see an electrification of the system and also in the industry. The residential sector, so for instance, heat pumps will be dominated, but also others, also geothermal energy and so on. And finally, we also consider the transport sector. On the one hand, on the left-hand side here, we see passenger transport, and on the right-hand side, freight transport. In the passenger transport sector, of course, we need a lot of e-mobility, electric vehicles on the road, and in the freight transport sector, of course, also our model relies on hydrogen in order to meet, let's say, the settings to comply with the 1.5 degree scenario. Okay, so this was now the first cluster. So this was a comprehensive presentation of the results. And now I only show for the remaining ones a few highlights and the differences or the most important differences. So the techno-friendly, here I show the electricity generation on the left-hand side. And in the techno-friendly, as I already said in the storyline explanation, so here we rely on the economies of scale of, let's say, the big offshore wind farms and technologies delivering on large scale. And then this is, let's say, one of the main characteristics here on the left-hand side. If we compare, let's say, the dark or the blue-gray, so it's more gray than blue colors, so it's equal. And this is, let's say, equal share of onshore and offshore in 2050. And our offshore numbers in 2050 here show more or less 1,700 terawatt hours of electricity generation based on offshore wind. So this is more than twice what has been, let's say, assumed in the recent World Energy Outlook, where there also was a focus on offshore wind. But this scenario here is even more ambitious. And in the techno-friendly, so here we also rely on the breakthrough of novel technologies like CCS. So we have we see on the right hand side the CO2 emissions, but even more important here on the left hand side. So here we also see negative, let's say, CO2 emissions, so CO2 removal technologies. And therefore, on the right hand side in the industry, so there is not a need to, let's say, to phase out from the fossils as fast as, for instance, in the societal commitment, because we can, let's say, absorb some CO2 emissions in the CCS technology. So this is one of the examples how an alternative energy future could happen without, let's say, guessing which, let's say, story and scenario finally will become true in real life. And here we see directed transition. Directed transition, as I already said, has a strong policy focus. So where policies trigger and govern also future developments. So on the left-hand side, so for instance, you see again the primary energy fuels, the development. So in dark red, so for instance, you see here also nuclear. So we anticipated here in the model, so the ongoing discussions, or maybe the one or another country will also discuss to phase into nuclear. And we anticipated this in addition, of course, to existing implemented policies of lifetime extensions and so on. And on the right-hand side, you see, let's say, the electricity fraction of this only. And of course, so this is a model, let's say, making a snapshot on a 5 years average. And for instance, here, so if we have a focus on nuclear, so between 2020 and 25, so we have more nuclear capacities. Somebody, of course, also could model them in 2030, let's say, only. Anticipating so that then the nuclear power plant finally is online, technology currently under construction, but finally this does not change, let's say, the results of the model. The earlier, let's say, and already, let's say, under construction or developed technology is used, let's say, the more we can release in the later years, because otherwise our model, so between 45 and 50, simply needs to produce, let's say, hydrogen or another technology to finally comply to our results. So but this will be, of course, fine-tuned also now in the country-specific settings. And of course, when we deliver the final results towards the end of the year or beginning next year, of course, we perfectly scale everything to the up-to-date policies right now. And as I already said, so in the directed transition, we, on the one hand, still have, let's say, significant nuclear capacities in the countries where the policies also point into that direction. And on the other hand, for instance, also in Poland, we see that the coal-dominated electricity system is, for instance, increasingly replaced by gas-fired power plants. And the gradual development, as I already said, is a little bit of each. So here we have less final demand reductions. Therefore, we need more primary energy use and electricity generation. And most important is what we see on the right-hand side, that we do not need to approach carbon neutrality in 2040, but in 2050. We see here in 2040, we still have a significant CO2 emissions. And we also do not rely here on CO2 removal technologies. And this is supposed to be a scenario complying to the 2 degree global warming target. And then in the corresponding report of these scenarios in 3.1, we have nice comparisons of the different scenarios in terms of different indicators. So here on the left-hand side, we see the capacities of the installed electricity generations, and on the right-hand side, the hydrogen use. I will just, let's say, mention 2 or 3 features each. So electricity generation capacities. So the yellow, the yellow color shows the techno-friendly. So this means that we rely on the economies of scale and we need less installed capacities. On the other hand, so for instance, the blue one is the societal commitment. So these are the small rooftop PVs and so on. We have high decentralized and local installed capacities. So for instance, so this is how these figures can be interpreted. And on the other hand, on the right hand side, so for instance, when talking about hydrogen, so when looking to the red color, so this is the gradual development. So there is not necessarily a significant penetration until 2040, but then let's say that the needs of our model until 2050 is that in the last 10 years, we produce a lot of hydrogen in order to comply to the 2-degree scenario. So this is a necessity of our model. And of course, it's also risky if we right now say, okay, we will not progress with hydrogen until 2040, but we rely on the period between 2040 and 2050. And this is, let's say, one key figure and a key result also of our exercise, because these are the CO2 prices or the carbon prices finally governing all the, let's say, trade-offs in the model, the economic trade-offs. And this is not, let's say, what we wish carbon prices should be. So these are endogenous results of the model to find feasible solutions. And if we have a look at the green color, so this is the directed transition. So this is the, let's say, the least risky one, that we say, okay, we have to act right now and do something in order to comply to our targets, and not to wait until 2030, 35, and then hopefully we can produce hydrogen on very large scale economically and so on. And these are really really significant CO2 prices. Here we are talking already about 200 and 400 euros per ton CO2 in the next 5 to 10 years. And this is, let's say, some more or less conclusions from my presentation right now, some findings. So it's very important. These are not overall now policy recommendations or conclusions of the entire openENTRANCE project. So it's, let's say, it's a milestone now. Our exercises we have conducted here on aggregated European level. These are first insights also for us as a consortium. And hopefully also we get feedback from you on the open platform, so how to improve everything. And all these inputs, of course, will be taken into consideration, and then also in the upcoming year for the detailed country-specific input data scaling and improvement of the settings and constraints in general. But only a few highlights, 5, 6 highlights. So if we want to comply to the 1.5 degree target, so we have to act right now, and very, very fast. And our modeling exercise shows that in 2030, we already shall reduce our CO2 emissions by 2/3 compared to right now. So this means that we only should have theoretically only 1/3 of today's emissions. So then we are safe to comply to this target. And let's say the least risky strategy is to rely, let's say, on a directed transition scenario. So this means that we need a strong policy gearing already right now to end up. We also, of course, if we rather, let's say, think it could also be the techno-friendly or societal commitment, but this is even more risky, because then we rely that, let's say, maybe in 10, 15 years, so there will be a take up of all these expectations, how, let's say, the storylines describe these scenarios. And just a few now.
Hans, you're approaching the end, I assume. Yeah, we are slightly on overtime. So.
Okay, so we are already on overtime. So this is the last slide. So here I just want to Here I just want to show the link to the open platform of the Scenario Explorer, where we invite everybody already to be active. So here the GENeSYS-MOD model and the results I've shown here, they are available for everybody. And this, let's say, already concludes my presentation. And Petra, sorry for being a few minutes in overtime. So that's it. Thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to the discussion then afterwards.
We planned on, also if we had time, we planned on having short questions straight after the presentation. We are slightly on overtime. There's one question in the chat which is quite quick to answer. I think we can take that one, but then we'll go straight to the other ones. And there'll be ample possibilities both in the break and afterwards to have a discussion with the presenters. So the question you might be able to answer quickly, Hans, is: do the scenarios consider interaction between the three dimensions, such as between the society policy and technology policy interfaces? Or is it just looking at the single, you could say, axis scenarios?
So at present, it's the single axis, but this is the idea of the open source approach, that everybody in the future can, let's say, put the different weights to the different, let's say, characteristics in the storylines, and then in the parameter settings that several, let's say, weights and combinations in this cube then can be modeled. But at present, it's the extremes. It's not a combination.
Yeah, thank you. And as I said, it'll be possible to talk with Hans in the breaks, and more questions can be asked in the panel discussions. Now to Dr. Yvonnie Matechak from ERA, which is through the SUPEERA project, is a co-sponsor of the workshop. ERA is one of the tools with respect within SETplan. So Yvonne, maybe you can introduce yourself, and when you have given us a short overview of SUPEERA, Tina Koljonen from VTT, which is also part of the SUPEERA project, will continue. Please, Yvonne.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Peter, for this introduction. Just confirming that you can see properly my presentation. Unfortunately, I cannot put it in display mode because for unknown reasons, technical. So,
that's fine. I think you can just go ahead, yeah.
Okay, let me just present myself briefly. My name is Yvonnie Matechak. I'm from European Energy Research Alliance. And today I'll be here as the project coordinator of the project SUPEERA, which stands the support to the coordination of national research and innovation programs in areas of activities of the European Energy Research Alliance. We as well, all areas looking how to reach the climate energy transition, and SUPEERA in specific tries to do it through the facilitation of implementation of the SETplan, but also through different tools such as the analysis of NSCPs. And exactly today, I will go through quickly what, from our point of view, we are doing in this respect. SUPEERA, just for you to know, it's the coordination support action as such, differs a lot from the openENTRANCE approach, and also it has obviously a different scope. So SUPEERA support, as I said, the SETplan and the clean energy transition as such. And what we say that we facilitate the coordination of the research community in the execution of the SETplan. We try to accelerate innovation and uptake by industry. We try to provide recommendation policy, of course, to promote the SETplan and energy transition. ERA, ICBL, is the only beneficiary of this grant, and we are supported by linked third parties, which are stated here below: KIT, CAA, SINTEF, DTU, and VTT. When it arrives to SUPEERA and NSCPs in particular, what we try to do. We are analyzing, first of all, the energy measures that are within NSCPs. So those energy measures that somehow should reach the target set in the Paris Agreement, but also in the high-level European Commission policies. Based on this, we try to define the pathways between different realities in terms of maturity and regional coverage, maturity in terms of technology and regional coverage between the member states. Then we create the dialogue between industry and energy experts, mostly between industry, regional industry clusters, and the joint programs of ERA. And in the end, we will try, after the project ends, to lay down a set of recommendations on area policies deriving from the analysis of NSCPs. A bit of the context. Now we have been hearing, well, how to reach all this scenario, but let's see how we stand. So we had context that I call here de facto, so what we have in the field, and the next one is going to be de jure, actually what is written down by the Commission. So if you can see on this, this representation, which is from EAA, you can see that although all the nice things that we are talking about, the renewables, the new renewables, are counting only of the 4% of the current energy supply. So it is enough for us to have the low cost, the cost competitive low carbon technology to reach the targets we are talking about, or maybe something else is needed, because as also Professor Auer said, we need to act quickly, but in my opinion, we should have acted already 2 or 3 years ago to reach those. So it's quite demanding and quite challenging when you talk about this. So the technology evolution is critical, but not sufficient for sure, the condition to achieve the energy transition and the two, let's say the two targets, 1.2 or 2.0 on the longer term. So the driving the energy transition should go beyond the technology itself. And there we should also consider the consumer behavior that will affect the entire human society. This is what we have today. So just 4% of renewable in the whole energy supply as of 2018. What the Commission and what the European Union did it so far. We have a clean energy plan for all. It's a general framework we are asked to work with. Then we have a European Green Deal, the new policy set down by Ursula von der Leyen, with a more detailed and quite ambitious plan to combat climate change with 55% reduction by 2030 versus the current 40% goal. And how they do intend to do that? They asked member states to produce the national energy climate plans, by which they're asking them to set down, well, many policies and instruments, which include 5 dimensions: decarbonization, energy efficiency, energy security, internal energy market, research, innovation, competitiveness. So what we have, what is our SUPEERA methodology? We take NSCPs and we start analyzing them in all member states, so 27 member states. We go through the statutes, objectives, to policy and programs, and also we are trying to find out if there are any examples of different countries and regions that we can combine and then show as a best practice. Then we go further, we look to the relevant European framework strategies. For example, today I'm going to show you what we did where we define hydrogen as a pathway. So for example, we take NSCPs, but we then also look to European hydrogen strategy and we see if they match, and if not, how to overcome this gap. And then we establish a dialogue. So we want, during the project implementation, we want to put together, as I said before, entire community, industry, and pilot some of the pathways in the next 3 years of project implementation, which in the end will allow us to identify some key cases and then also to pilot them from then on. So why hydrogen? So we decided to look specifically to several technologies, but today I'll talk to you about hydrogen. Hydrogen because it became a key priority for the European Green Deal and European clean energy transition as such. And as we know, this is especially important in the last 2 years, and especially now after the COVID pandemic and the recovery plans. Renewable energy electricity, well, we will have this source, but for sure it's not going to be enough to reach the objectives. Hydrogen is excellent to replace fossil fuels, as we know, both in the carbon-intensive processes, but also in transport system. Its potential to use already existing infrastructure, and as I said a few moments ago, it is an excellent opportunity for the member states to invest, so to also boost the recovery from the COVID-19 crisis. Hydrogen strategy, it's built on, well, we have 3 main steps. As you can see here, I will leave this, this presentation nonetheless for your reference. And what are the findings? Well, there are several important findings. As introduction, I need to tell you that no NSCPs are, well, different NSCPs between different member states are not alike at all. So we have Italian one, for example, that sets key actions, but then it doesn't tell how they want to achieve that. Then you have the Finnish one, which is quite detailed. But then you have Eastern European ones, which are completely disconnected between what is, well, the idea also of the energy transition as such. So the analysis of this one was quite difficult. These are the findings. So the European industry needs the clarity, and the investors need the certainty in the transition. So there are many things that yet need to be defined. All the NSCPs have a clear goal. That's good. So the climate neutral energy system integration. There are the challenges on the long period. There should be a clear plan how to do that. Although, as I said before, many of these NSCPs doesn't define a clear pathway to achieve the targets. And for example, what is a huge problem of NSCPs, they do not unband many current policies. For example, European Green Hydrogen Alliance, it's completely absent for the NSCPs because it arrived after. So also these NSCPs, it means that will be they need to be readjusted and redefined further on. But as I said, there are also some good practices and good examples of how the NSCPs can bring to the scenario we are talking about and to the targets. So we analyzed these 4 main aspects on the production, on infrastructure, on creation of market and demand, and the collaboration. As you can see, there are some of the member states, they are quite forward in definition of hydrogen as a tool to reach climate neutrality and the targets we talk about, both in terms of production and infrastructure. So what is actually here important to state that we are still carrying out this initiative. We are still analyzing all the NSCPs, which, as I said before, will be somehow redefined in the view of the recovery plans, because the recovery plans should go first to the NSCPs, take the measures that are closer to the market and bring them and realize them in the wake of pandemic. And on the other side, what also NSCPs, some of them are missing completely, are all the elements of the set plan. If you read, for example, the Italian NSCP, it mentioned just once in the 400 pages what about the set plan. And we are all somehow working for the execution of set plan. So there's really plenty of challenges, but also plenty of potential to have the NSCPs as a good tool for the reach of the targets and also to achieve a climate neutral society. Thank you very much. I will leave it to Tina. Peter, floor is yours.
Thank you. If you stop sharing, Ivan, then Tina can start sharing. Tina, you've also been part of the SUPEERA, and the rest of the presentation from SUPEERA is yours. And please give a short introduction to who you are.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Tiina Koljonen, and I'm coming from VTT Technical Research Center of Finland. At VTT, we are doing a lot of scenario studies to support the policy making in Finland, but also support other countries. So I will shortly give an overview about, as an example of what is happening in Finland. But can you show my slides, please? Just a word, I have had some serious connection problems today, but hopefully everything will be working today. So next, please. So this is just a shortcut what is really happening at the moment in Finland. So Finland has a carbon neutrality target 2035. At the moment, we are working with preparation of our new climate and energy policies and strategies and new climate law. So Finland has had a climate law for many years, but it is now the time when we are updating the climate law in parallel to the strategy and policy making. As an example, the climate law, that is not only about the 2050 targets for greenhouse gas emissions. It will set up the 2035 net zero target, but also the milestones in between. So what is really needed for 2030, what is needed for 2040, and then finally 2050. And this is also about what is really the carbon budget for Finland if we look at the goals of Paris Agreement. We are now working with the climate and energy strategy up to 2040. That will be finalized hopefully next fall. So there really will be a new policies and measures how to reach carbon neutrality in Finland. In parallel, we are also updating new medium-term climate policy plan that is also for 2030. So the medium-term climate policy plan is only for burden sharing sector. So these strategy and climate policy plan are, of course, these are established in parallel. In addition to that, just beginning of this year, it was also launched the fossil-free transport by 2045, so the roadmap. And in fact, this work will also continue. It's continue already today, but also still continuing next fall. So why I'm talking about this? In Ivan's presentation, you were talking about NECPs. But for example, what we are seeing now in Finland, NECPs are already now rather old policies. So there will be a new baseline. So with existing measures, that was also written in the NECPs. So the governance directive gives the rules how to establish with existing measures. In our new baseline will include the 2030 policies, so those are already implemented. And then about the new policy scenario, so what additional measures? So that will be used also for the updating of the NECP in 2022. So this is just to give an example that the process is really, really ongoing. So when we are publishing the NECPs, we are already then one step ahead. So next, please. So you are about the first ones to see our new preliminary with existing measure for greenhouse gas emissions. So this is really a preliminary. I know that there are already now some updates. As you see that already in the with existing measures, which is now under construction, the greenhouse gas mitigation up to 2030 is already really pretty high in Finland. So we already have a law which says that coal will be phased out by 2029. The new government program says that we need to at least halve the peat use in Finland. In Finland, we also will have a new nuclear, but of course, other renewables, especially wind, will play a big role. As you imagine, there will be a large reduction in transport sector, but also the building sector. And then the quick question, what really is that what was also presented, what is really the price development of the EU allowance as an example? And what is also really happening with the EU Green Deal? So what is really, for example, the Fit for 55 with additional measures? So these are the very, very high uncertainties what we are facing when we are now running the scenarios in Finland, and especially if you think about how openENTRANCE could support, these are the things we are looking for now. Next, please. Another preliminary, very fresh results from electricity supply with existing measures, so including the policies and measures we already now have until 2030. As you see, pretty high share is still with the nuclear in Finland. So we are expecting that the share of nuclear will be increasing. So this is the opposite compared to, as example, for Germany. Coal will be really phased out. And the other fossil peat is also phased out. But then we are also having a large share of biomass. So that mainly comes from the forest industries, but also a little bit also from district heating and combined heat and power sector. Wind is a big question mark. So the quick question is really that when we are looking at the situation in Finland, so what will happen in Nordics? As an example, are the wind investments going to happen in Finland, or is it more economical to invest in our neighboring countries? So not only Sweden and Norway, but also the Baltics and especially the offshore region when we are talking about wind. And then what is really happening in Central Europe? So if we are talking about export and import electricity. Next, please. Then I come back to the transport sector, because when we are looking at the transport sector in Finland and compared to the average EU level scenarios, which were also shown in previous presentation. You can also learn a little bit Finnish there, because sorry, these some of the slides are in Finnish because we are doing this for the Finnish government. So you can see that this is now the policy scenario already. Fossil diesel, that will phase out by 2045. Fossil gasoline, the same story by 2045. But how to really replace them? We have a pretty high share of second generation biofuels. Electricity, it will enter there. But you can see that probably this is not so fast compared to some other European countries, and especially Norway. Biogas will be important. But what is even more important is that when we are talking about hydrogen, I have been looking at the EU level scenarios, and hydrogen was also discussed in the previous presentation by Yvonnie. But when we are talking about in Finland the hydrogen, it is more about going not to use directly hydrogen, but going more like a synthetic e-fuels. So power to gas and power to liquids. Interesting question is also that we just received very, very new news that the Finnish company Neste will invest in Rotterdam, the new biodiesel plant. So where we will really get all this biodiesel in the future. So that will be also a challenge. And then it will be important to look at the EU and the other EU countries as well. And the urgency. In Finland, we have our ambitions to get rid of fossils I guess that is higher than when we are comparing to the average EU level. Next, please. One slide about industry. Industry, you see on the left-hand side the steel industries in Finland. There is the ongoing process and project in collaboration with Finland and Sweden, where they will be this instead of using coke, they are moving to more like hydrogen. And In the industrial sector, it's also important that it is high electrification and also use of hydrogen instead of fossil raw materials and fuels. In that sense, it's also very important to look at that how the development of EU's infrastructure and electricity markets are really happening. So because these two are really essentials for the success, and we are so that we are able to implement the policies and measures and going towards the carbon neutrality. Next, please. So this is my last slide. So I just tried to highlight some examples that why we are really looking for EU level collaboration. It is about EU level scenarios. It is also the collaboration between member states. And then we are coming back to analyzing also the other NECPs and all long-term strategies. So we really need the holistic understanding and collaboration to ensure the fair transition. So thank you very much.
Peter, you're muted if you're talking to us.
Unmute. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you, Tina. I think both you and Yvonne's presentation showed the necessity to kind of couple the national efforts with overall European and you could say global scenarios. And as Hans said in the beginning, the next step is to kind of show what the model or connect the model to the national detail. And I think the collaboration between, you could say, ERA and SUPEERA's contact with the member states and the openENTRANCE project is a good link that we should push forward with. We will go straight to the last presentation before the first panel. Carlo Heinz and Konstantin Löffler, please take control of the screen and go ahead.
Can you already see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Then thank you, Petra, for that introduction. My name is Carlo Heinz. I'm working at the Technical University in Berlin, and I will speak for myself and for my colleague Konstantin Löffler as well. So just one presentation now, condensed everything. And I'm happy to show you basically findings from recent work that we did, which are based on the presentation that Hans showed you a couple of minutes ago, talking about European decarbonization pathways, also outside of openENTRANCE, and see if there's robust findings across studies, what methodologies can we apply there, and then also trying to bridge again the gap to the European Green Deal and see how the consideration there is. And I will cut this introduction short, also due to time constraints. I'm sure all of you are aware of the European Green Deal and the pledge for greenhouse gas neutrality by 2050, which comes with it. And this pledge comes at a time where decarbonization pathways of the European energy system, but also of national energy systems, as we just saw now by Tina, but also global ones, are basically on the rise, and a large number is being published every year. However, what becomes increasingly complex is the communication of the results of these pathways. It becomes more and more complicated, more complex. The more scenarios there are, the more things there are to take into account. And this basically raises the question of how can we as researchers and as modelers try to convey our results to decision and policy makers in a way that they can work with them without putting too much time into trying to understand the results and trying to understand why they look the way they look. As a quick anecdote, I'm sure all modelers here at least will know the quote from George E.P. Box, which is, "All models are wrong, but some are useful." And coming back a fact that often, I won't say is forgotten, but seems to be neglected, is that strength of model does not really lie in the provision of absolute numbers and single numbers. That's not where models are good, especially now. Hans alluded to it earlier. Scenario analysis is not trying to show how the world would be, but how the world could be. So this is basically where all models are wrong. The question is, when do they become useful? And they become useful if scenarios, if results are being compared, not necessarily to results only from the same model, but also from other ones. But this is basically where strength of model lies, and we as modelers have to make sure to transmit this message. So reviews and comparison are quite an essential part of communicating model results. And lately there has been a very comprehensive work by Tsiropoulos et al. From the Joint Research Center, which analyzed European decarbonization pathways, which have been published between 2017 and 2019. They analyzed 26 publications consisting of 67 scenarios in total. And interestingly, out of these 67 scenarios, only 8 of them, so let's say about 12%, reach both the long-term goal of almost decarbonization of the energy system by 2050, as well as the ambitious or more ambitious climate targets in the near term until 2030 of 55% as pledged by the European Green Deal. The 60% as discussed by the European Parliament is basically never achieved anywhere. But what the authors also find is that the numerical evidence for reaching these climate targets is not always really provided in these studies, which is a very interesting fact considering that this is one of the main tools when driving policies, is the decarbonization targets at certain years. And the other one is that there was large discrepancies, not in the overall findings of the studies, if you're looking at the bigger picture, but when going into detail. As an example, I put here basically an extract of results when it comes to carbon capture and storage quantities. And in 13 scenarios where almost near decarbonization was achieved by 2050, across these 13 scenarios, the values for carbon captured and stored differed between 36 megatons CO2 per year and 466. That's factor 12. Also, there's other studies which either say and state that there is no carbon capture and storage, so it's 0, and others who do not provide any information on it, so it's unclear how far this is being used. But this already shows a huge problem when analyzing a single scenario or study, that then the values when it comes to these details can vary quite significantly, and it's only with the help of extensive knowledge of input assumptions and the overall structure of models that one can explain and understand these results in a way that would be necessary. You are familiar with this 3D scenario generation process. I will dive now into our work that we've been doing. And this generation or three-dimensional process is not only suitable for the generation of pathways, which you could see 2 presentations ago, 3 by Hans, but it's also suitable for assessing the scope of other scenarios. An exercise which we have conducted in our work, where taking 16 decarbonization pathways in more detail, among others, we basically highlight what aspects across these 3 dimensions are included or stated at least by the authors of the respective studies when it comes to what their scenarios tackle. And here you can see a small example of one of these studies, one of these tables that we have, where we show that in the technological side, usually there's more detail. The models being techno-economic models, that's also to be expected because that's their inherent strength. What also can be found is that societal and behavioral assumptions or changes are quite rare in the current literature, which is an interesting fact, which can basically easily be seen once this exercise here is done. And it also helps in the comparison of the different scenarios when it comes to analyzing the results. Now, what we did is, out of these 16 decarbonization pathways that we analyzed, we wanted to take a closer look at some of them, because if I tell you here the whole time that you have to compare energy scenarios against others, that's also something we wanted to do with our open entrance pathways, to not have them standing alone in like the void, but trying to put them into the context of other scenarios which has been conducted by other research institutes or institutions. And we found 2 studies with a very similar methodology and scope of the analysis, those being the Clean Planet for All study and the deployment scenarios for low carbon energy technologies from the Low Carbon Energy Observatory, which both have multiple scenarios being analyzed, but in particular 3 of the, I think in total it's 12, fit very well with the general idea of the pathways, those being high degrees of decarbonization, basically reaching zero carbon in 2050, and also using similar kind of models, which is also important when taking a look at scenarios, because the boundaries your analysis has and the interface of these boundaries is very, very crucial for the result analysis and the shape of the results. So we wanted to make sure that these are at least very similar. So we took a look at these 3 scenarios. We will show now results for 4 KPIs. Thankfully, data was available, which also Hans alluded to earlier is very important in work as well. Data availability is so important in our field of research, and even was provided additional information by the authors upon request. So we're very thankful for that and very happy about this. Going into the exact comparison now, I'll show you 4 graphs, and our instinct as researchers and modelers generally is let's find the difference, who can spot the differences. And although this is a very reasonable way of approaching these scenarios, also one has to highlight that they look very similar. And when trying to find out what common findings can be, what robust results can be, this is actually where one can or should start to see what are common findings found across everything. Now looking here at this slide, we see the comparison of final energy consumption. On the left-hand side, we see it disaggregated per fuel, while on the right-hand side, it's disaggregated per sectors. And we see first, let's stick with the fuels, that we see a very, very similar build. Electricity will make up 40, 50, 60% of total energy consumption in 2050. The difference in the way of, for example, the blue, I'm not sure if you can read it on the slides, but on the left graph, the blue area is heat, or more specifically industry heat, is something that isn't reported in the open-entrance graph, which is why it's not in there. But apart from that, they look very similar, with obviously the respective differences when necessary. Generally, the final amount of energy consumption is a little bit higher in the open-entrance scenarios. This is due to multiple reasons. One of them is that the Clean Planet for All studies for the 1.5 degrees, so life and tech, they assume high amounts of demand reduction or also high degree of technological development. And also the representation of certain sectors might differ across the studies, especially the industry sector, where the degree of detail can change a lot in terms of the results when it comes to which processes are being modeled, which temperature levels are being modeled. Is it more an aggregated one or disaggregated? This is where a lot comes into play. Taking a quick look at the right-hand side figure, we see buildings is quite constant across all the sectors, always averaging about 40% of the final energy consumption. And then there seems to be a trade-off between industry and transport. Now my thesis that I'm going to put out now, I'm going to also trying to prove with my next slide as well, is that this trade-off is mainly due to the amount of hydrogen and synthetic fuels being used in the different sectors, as well as the availability of breakthrough technologies when it comes to electrification of these sectors. So without further ado, going to the next slide, on the left-hand side, we can see the electrification rate. Let's stick with this one. So it's the electrification rate in the sectors of how much of the final energy consumed by these sectors is directly being produced by electricity, not indirectly. So hydrogen here would count towards electrification. And we see that transportation, the red triangles, as well as buildings, the blue dots, are very similar or very stable across all the studies. There is not much change here. Industry seems to fluctuate a little bit more. And the reason for this, what we found, is mainly due to the availability of CCS. So the moment CCS is readily available and economically feasible, there is more fossil fuel being used in the industry sector. And then obviously less is being electrified. Now, the one difference is the techno-friendly scenario. That's the black sheep, if you want to call it that way. And so transportation has an incredible high degree of electrification with 70%, and industry is comparably low. And the reason here is that in a techno-friendly scenario, we went as far as to allow overhead trolley trucks for freight transportation. Freight transportation is one of the most difficult to decarbonize well, energy sectors, if you so want to call it. And road transportation basically is there isn't really any feasible way of large-scale batteries for road transportation, except for, or electrification, but except for if there's overhead trolley trucks, which here are being allowed, which leads to this huge amount of 70% in transportation. Vice versa, there is more hydrogen now being free because it's not being required in the transportation sector anymore. So this one can be used in the industry sector together with carbon capture and storage, which is why this here is a little bit lower. Looking at the capacities required, first, it can be seen that capacities rise across all different scenarios. Another common finding, which is very important, and that basically can be found across the literature in every study. The open entrance pathway in 2030, which is here on the left-hand side of the graph, show a little bit higher capacities compared to the other ones in general. This can be attributed to also the higher decarbonization amounts, which are being achieved at least by 3 of the 4 pathways on open entrance, which Hans already alluded to earlier, is about 65% greenhouse gas emission reduction in 2030, while the others achieve around 50–55%. In 2050, we see that the technology-based pathways, so the techno-friendly from open entrance, as well as the 1.5 tech from Clean Planet for All study, are very similar when it comes to basically the required capacities in total, as well as the share of the different energy carriers or generation technologies. The odd sheep here is the LCEO result, which shows incredibly high amounts of capacities. Some of them can definitely be attributed also to the fact that hydrogen is being used in the power sector itself. You can see the light blue area on the right bar. This hydrogen, A, being used in the electricity sector obviously increases the amount of fuel here, and B also has to produce somehow. And then, I mean, thermodynamics teaches us the more energy conversion there is on the way, the more losses you have. So this is where capacities are required for. And then after now showing you these similarities and differences, we want to go back to the 3-dimensional approach that we introduced in the scenario generation process, in the scenario evaluation process. And we want to see what finding or what action plans which are defined in the European Green Deal, or how are they represented in our model findings and the key findings that we have? Is there anything we can take out of our analysis? Seeing that we're short on time, I will briefly go over this and then happily answer any questions later or also in the break. To reference back to the presentation earlier, for example, in the industry sector, we can see basically across all studies that it's being stated that something which might be difficult to model, but is still very important, is that industry needs to have security, regulatory security about how future developments will pay out in order to make investments accordingly. Apart from that, the electricity sector, most of this is basically already common knowledge when it comes to decarbonizing and having more renewable energies. Well, yeah, if there is any more questions here, please, I'm very happy to answer them. But concluding everything, I want to say that with the wide range of decarbonization studies existing in the literature, analyzing and interpreting the results becomes even more important. And this is something which shouldn't be forgotten among us among study publishers. The European Green Deal covers a lot of relevant and required areas of action, definitely, and it's a good step towards this, and it also sparked new analysis and new studies being conducted. Something which we found generally is that sufficiency aspects are basically not yet covered enough, neither in the European Green Deal nor in energy system modeling, or for that matter, related modeling, which doesn't directly target sufficiency aspects. Which an interesting question for others as well, but for future research would be: is there a correlation between this? Is this just something which isn't communicated to decision makers enough, or is it just that there isn't enough there, or is it not possible to put decisions regarding sufficiency or regulatory frameworks regarding sufficiency in the European Green Deal? And the three-dimensional scenario generation approach is not only a scenario generation approach, but also an evaluation approach, which is very helpful when analyzing and trying to compare results. And with that, I thank you for your attention. I'm happy to answer questions, as I said, and I hand back over to Peter.
Thank you, Carlo. I think a very interesting or illustrative part of your presentation was that the 3 dimensions kind of set up a space, and you showed how you can start moving in the space instead of just following one of the dimensions, and also by actually comparing it to other scenarios on how to get there, and that's kind of the type of discussion comparison we invite others to join us in openENTRANCE. Now we have created this space and please come join us in kind of discussing how to move through this space in order to kind of best possibly get to the goal. And I also think it's good for modelers, as you said in your introduction, to kind of think about what your model does actually, and the big scare for people watching modelers is to end up with a modeler that believes that his model is more real than the world itself. But I think we're quite some way away from that. Let's see. I cannot see that there was a question straightly also directly to your presentation. So what I think you brought us back on track. Thank you, time-wise. I think we have time for, say, 4 minutes a break so that people can kind of have a bio break or go get a cup of coffee before the panel starts. So be back at 14:05 precisely, because then we'll start the panel discussions. And if you want to keep on, please keep on using the chat to post questions. Yeah, I promise to start our workshop again at 2:05. So we are now getting ready for the panel discussion. For the panel discussion, Tina and Hans, who presented, will join us in a short while. First, we'd like to welcome Dr. Sebastian Busch from the European Commission and Marlene Petz from the Austrian Power Grid, also a member of the ENTSO modeling team at the European level. Sebastian and Marlene, you'll have some time to give you a statement and an input and challenge the presenters, and then we'll go straight for the discussion afterwards. So Sebastian, please. If you have a presentation, just share the screen and upload it.
Yeah, I have no presentation, so it will be just verbally. So thank you very much, Peter, and thank you very much to the openENTRANCE and SUPEERA teams for the invitation. Yeah, my name is Sebastian Busch. I'm a project officer in the Joint Research Center of the European Commission, which is the European Commission's Science and Knowledge Service. Therefore, I'm also not in a position to share any official information on the forthcoming EU policies. However, our unit works closely with different Commission services to provide the knowledge and analyze the knowledge for the formulation of EU policies in the context of the Green Deal. And among several other activities, we are also hosting the Secretariat of the SET Plan. So, but now then on the presentations and on the results. So let me start by saying that I think your work comes very timely. And here I want to make a brief link to the current policy context. Ivan had already some of the important context in his presentation, and also Carlo referred to it. I could add to that the European Commission is currently in the process of preparing some detailed legislative proposals that will show how the 55% greenhouse gas reduction target for 2030 that has been proposed and agreed upon last year can be reached. And this work will include the review and, where necessary, revision of all policy areas that are relevant to achieve this additional reduction. And this includes, for instance, existing legislations like the Renewable Energy Directive or the Energy Efficiency Directive, but also new elements like the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. So, and for all these works, these proposals, they need to be accompanied by impact assessments where scenarios are a very important part of. And in developing these impact assessments, the Commission usually conducts own scenarios, but equally takes stock of all the work, scenario work that is conducted by the scientific community and other relevant shareholders. So as I said again, that since you are presenting the work now, it is very timely to also feed into these processes. Then before I go maybe into some more detailed comments on the results, let me mention some general aspects that we in our internal discussions, but also in a workshop that we conducted with IRENA on long-term scenarios, identified as important. First, we see a trend that scenarios are increasingly communicated and discussed to support the debate on the energy transition. Therefore, noting that already quite some progress has been made, we still think it would be worthwhile to pursue even further efforts to towards the harmonization of the results. That is also something where what Carlo has referred to, and yeah, something we also saw in our own work where we made this meta-analysis of scenarios. So I think in the end, to be useful for a robust impact assessment, yeah, we need to have a very good comparability of these scenarios. Secondly, we think that similarities in scenarios can create a predictable environment both for investors and for research and innovation activities, showing what needs to be done and at what speeds. Therefore, we also think that the models that are used to analyze the scenarios should cover in sufficient detail these choices when it comes to investment choices and R&I choices. And here we think in the further efforts to expand modeling capabilities, I could give you two examples where we think it would be worthwhile to pursue further efforts. One I would name here is energy efficiency, to get the choices, energy efficiency choices in the models, and also now even more the sector coupling. That is, yeah, the other trend that we are seeing. Then maybe let me make here the link to yeah, the presentations now. And I think they were very relevant in this regards because you are already obviously addressing some of these issues through your work. First, the point of model comparability. Here, we are looking forward to the openENTRANCE scenario explorer, where we think which can make a very useful contribution here, and also yeah, the openness of the data is a very important aspect, so that also all the data is available to make these comparisons. Then maybe I mentioned the aspects of sector coupling, and here we were impressed by the work from the GENeSYS-MOD, which we think is quite a novel approach in that sense that it yeah, has quite a broad sector coupling implemented, but at the same time has a high granularity when it comes to modeling detailed aspects of renewables integrations. And yeah, we think that to answer the questions that we are facing now, ideally both these aspects are included in the models. Then I also mentioned the question how we can use scenarios to better derive R&I decisions from that. And I think here I would like to highlight the work that is yeah, done by the SUPEERA project. We consider this as very useful because, as you all know, the information is very dense often in the scenarios. It requires some yeah, translation work. And this is a very useful project here in this regards to help translate actually the findings from scenarios into actionable recommendations for research and innovation. Then before I hand over, I would also like to touch upon on some aspects where we think the knowledge presented in the scenario still appears a bit less consistent. And I would actually phrase this as a question then to the panel, and maybe in particular to Tina and Hans, who represent the presenters, the two projects on the panel. First, as Carlo has also pointed out, we noted that the final energy consumption in the openENTRANCE scenarios is significantly higher than in the long-term strategy, and he already provided some useful explanations for that. Still, I would like to ask, typically when we talk about, as I said, when we have commonalities in scenarios, that gives some some predictable environment for robust decisions. But when we talk about differences, this is often also linked to choices. And so my question would be, are there any trade-offs or choices that are linked to these different consumption levels between maybe different uptakes of renovations rates, or where do you see the bigger trade-offs when it comes to these bigger differences in final energy consumption? And then touching upon the NECPs, one thing that the Commission also found in it's in her assessment of the NSCPs is that they still show a gap when it comes to the 2030 energy efficiency target. And I was wondering if, based on your modeling activity in this work and your review of the scenarios, you can point to some specific measures where you think they still hold potential to cover this gap. Yeah, with these questions, I would leave it here for my initial remarks and hand back over to you, Petra.
Thank you, Sebastian. We have noted down the questions, and I think Hans and Tina is getting ready to answer. But first, we'll let Marlene give her input before we start the discussion.
Thank you very much. Hello to everybody. I hope you can hear me clearly.
Yes.
Perfect, perfect. And thanks for this invite to join this panel discussion today, which is very interesting to bring together academia and research-related topics with our daily business, which we face at the TSO world, meaning the transmission system operators. I personally work for the Austrian Power Grid AG, which is Austria's transmission operator, which is part of the ENTSO-E framework, meaning the European Network for Transmission System Operators. And in more detail, I am part of the team which tackles security of supply, and in very special details, resource adequacy assessments. What it all comes when we want to model future systems is the idea of which power or generation we will have installed at a certain target year, and with which assumptions the TSOs and especially the member states enter our models. And what we basically are forced to perform as a TSO, as part of the ENTSO-E, is at this moment for resource adequacy assessment, the European resource adequacy assessment named the ERA, which is a task given by the European Commission through the Clean Energy Package, relating from the Article 23 of 943. So maybe some of you already know this paper. And basically this gives the task to the TSO world how our future scenarios shall be built, but only for a limited time frame of up to 10 years in the future. So this is what my department currently cares. We look in the near future of up to 10 years. And then the colleagues from the asset department, which take care of the 10-year network development plan, those basically assess the overall grid development and the resource adequacy assessment, meaning which power plants will be available at a certain point in the future. And I think this whole framework basically makes our job and daily business that interesting to assess these points, which Hans already mentioned in the presentation about the technological development combined with policy requirements, which are given as a task to us to actually perform in our daily business, and then also the willingness of customers to change a certain behavior. And there, if we want to reach these targets, which were nicely described in today's presentations, meaning to reach carbon neutrality, there's lots of work to be done on all sides, basically to have this perfect setup, which we currently talk about how it will look like in 2050 or earlier or later, yeah, depending on how fast everything goes. But also it means each and everybody from us needs to contribute. The TSO side, the academia providing nicely developed models, because we have a certain knowledge at the TSO side and we have quite some modeling experts, but still this development goes that fast. Thinking also of what Sebastian just mentioned, how to take this efficiency into account and sector coupling. We will somewhere end up to not only model the electricity sector anymore, but also how to take care of these new technologies, power to X, power to hydrogen, how to incorporate the electronic vehicles, fleets all over Europe, and how this will impact the grid. And here also to follow up on what Tina stated, there are national energy and climate plans from each and every TSO, and everybody has set his goals to a certain extent. And what we see over Europe, not each and every member state is on the same pace. So some are faster, some are very well advanced, have a clear vision. And this way of input data, which we need to put to the model, this needs to be assessed, and also certain quality checks need to be performed. the best model does not only suffice if the input data is not to a certain amount of quality proof. And there it now comes together where I see also development of nice modeling approaches, but also we first need to have a proper insurance of the input data we retrieve to be one-to-one taken to our models. And since I always take care of quality, what goes into the model, and also what we retrieve, I want to highlight that this comparison between different modeling results is a really important one. We have in this ERA process 5 tools currently calculating in parallel, and in the end, we calibrate, or in between we calibrate, and in the end, we see if all are at a certain level of alignment. And there I think this is of utmost importance, so you cannot immediately say you need one tool to perform a certain assessment, but you also need to look further and see which development streams and which model is a tiny bit further. For example, let's say in the representation of thermal units, how much of hydro is taken into account. Also for Austria, yeah, a proper representation, but also by accepting the calculation times. We cannot do unit by unit for each and every single fleet. If we need to perform probabilistic assessments, which is also a part of our work to reflect stochastic uncertainty, we calculate 1,000 times the models we have, and then basically average to take into account stochastic uncertainty resulting from renewables, from PV, wind, the demand, which is highly dependent to climate input data. And this all goes together in order to achieve the goals which we discussed in this last 1.5 hours. We need to have each and every cornerstone put together, put the puzzle together in order to have the best fitting model according to the needs we define. And I think this makes this combination really interesting of how our life in industry looks like and how academia can contribute. And here I would for now leave it up and enter discussion with you. Thanks.
Thank you, Marlene. I think we're kind of broadening and kind of it's a complicated transition to model, certainly. But I'll let the panelists kind of answer and do the discussion primarily. Tina and Hans, you had some specific questions from Sebastian. Tina, do you want to start?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. I think the question related to the energy efficiency is highly relevant for the modelers. In addition, it's very complicated. I guess that well, I know that Finland was one of those member states which received comments from the Commission side that we need to update the NECP to highlight more what is really the role of energy efficiency. I can tell the story from Finnish side that how this is handled, because the challenge is that the energy efficiency, of course, it's everywhere. It's about buildings, it's about transport, it's about industries and everything. Typically, the energy efficiency investments, they are economically feasible already in the baseline or with existing measures scenario. So the investments pretty much go already there in the reference scenario or with the existing measures. And then how we really are able to think about that, what is the reality? Because this is not the thing that what is really happening. So they are some barriers for the investments, but when we are doing the like for example the bottom-up modeling for the linear optimization, it is very common that the investments are there already in the reference scenario. But then, of course, what is then in the Finnish and NECP, we can see that the energy efficiency is very important, especially in the transport sector. In Finland, the transport sector will be we need to cut about half our greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 to even be to reach the existing burden sharing target with 39 reduction compared to 2005. And we don't know about Fit for 55 yet. So what will really happening next? So that is definitely the sector where we need to work a lot. Buildings. In Finland, we have the district heating system. So it is only about separate heating. It's more a little about in rural areas. For example, we have checked all the buildings that where there is the highest potential. You go to the rural areas, they are old schools, which might be empty, or old health service buildings. And they are very difficult to get investments there because if they are not, we don't know what is happening to those buildings. And then there are also the bottlenecks, if we think about that you will invest in renewables, because in rural areas, they are typically these old separate houses, which probably have some retired people living there. So it will very much expensive to make new energy efficiency investments. But then what is happening to the industries? I think this is very, very important to look at really the industrial sector. In Finland, we have had this combined heat and power for the industries for decades. So we are already now in the very high level in the energy efficiency. The Commission has been asking us if you're looking at, for example, the EE directive. So what is really the potential for build even more district heating? We have been doing the mapping and we have ended up some challenges even to that sense. So it is very, very much also the country specific what is happening to the energy efficiency. But that is very, very important. But then how to really look at that, having that like a holistic analysis for energy efficiency. We need to, I think that we really need some more advanced methods. We need to look at having more also modeling about decision making of citizens, because they are doing a lot of decisions related to energy efficiency. But definitely, I think that we need new methods also, and to make this look better.
Yeah, I think also as you pointed out, the modeling, also at the models we have now, they need some detailed modeling, certainly within certain sectors, and they vary between the countries. But Hans, did you have a response to the question from Sebastian, or comments to it?
Yeah, so maybe I also can combine it with one or two questions in the chat, where also in terms of final energy demand and consumer behavior, rebound effect, and so on, there have been some detailed questions. And responding now to Sebastian, so in our modeling, when let's say describing let's say the extremes of these corners in our cube with the storylines I presented and the quantitative results, so we tried to take into account the different nuances. So for instance, the societal commitment scenario, we have the lowest final energy demand, because here we assume that we have an aware society and of course also incentivized already by policy making, so that we have these renovation rates very fast implemented and up to 2030 to reach these goals, and the society that they adapt and so on. So here we have the lowest final energy demand assumption. On the other hand, in the technology friendly, so this is more the scenario where we rely on on the economies of scale of large new technologies, large-scale production, hydrogen, CCS, offshore wind, far away, let's say, from the end user. And here we, let's say, anticipated some kind of rebound effect that people are not that aware about the demand reduction. And in directed transition, on the other hand, we said, okay, society is not aware, so then technology and policy have to sort out, and it's something in between. So we more or less try to take into account these nuances, showing in these extreme scenarios. And towards the end of the project, we also maybe come up with a fifth, more or less, result. So on the corner, a lot of all. So where we take into account really, let's say, everything, and maybe here we end up what we all wish to see in 2030 and 2050, that we have very low primary energy fuel needs and very low demand. But you are right, and this is the approach here of openENTRANCE and GENeSYS-MOD and the open platform, that in the future somebody can say, oh, okay, so what is our constraint, or which demand do we expect, and what will GENeSYS-MOD deliver then in terms of technology portfolio, and of course then also the implications for decision making and policy needs. A final remark. So in openENTRANCE, we also conduct different case studies. And here in these case studies, we also have some case studies where we do some kind of bottom-up modeling, modeling also energy communities with positive energy districts, with PV sharing and so on. And we work also on upscaling algorithms, how to let's say, figure this out and upscale it on country level to see the contribution of these future, let's say, passive plus energy housing systems, where we in these communities do not separate between generation and demand anymore, or energy efficiency, but we take into account it as an integrated approach, having in mind that the CO2 abatement costs, that they are negative for efficiency and then of course for generation. So this maybe also helps us in the future to better understand it. So also what Tina said. So we need also to fix it bottom up, to trying to quantify it, and of course then immediately derive the right policy recommendations. So how to incentivize, how to accelerate the implementation of renovation, because as Tina said, so the citizens, they make a lot of decisions, and maybe new business models also for energy contracting. So maybe we 20 years ago, so maybe it was not that successful, but maybe now maybe we also get a boost that new kind of business models for energy contracting emerge and will overcome this barrier. So and finally, Sebastian, as I said, so this frame in GENeSYS-MOD, so wherever we are within this cube, so we can even take into account more ambitious final energy demand scenarios. So you are right, we could do it even more empirically more ambitious, but maybe we leave it also to third parties then, so to have a nice exercise with the open platform.
Thank you, Hans. I'll just to the panelists, also if you can make your interventions a little shorter, that'll be more action for the people listening. So please, Malena, you said you...
Yeah, thank you. May I also ask the question if demand-side response is already taken up in your modeling approaches? There's some scenarios which take those.
Sebastian, did you want to...
No, not at this point.
No. Also, I have a question. Yeah, I have a few questions myself also, because I feel we have models and we started working with models, and we kind of agree that we need more models in order to have a robust enough, you could say, simulation of the transition. And one of the big challenges with a lot of renewables is the balancing. Also, it's not that easy to kind of fit an uncontrolled power production with an uncontrolled demand. I would assume that's a big challenge for the TSOs. that you are modeling quite in detail. Also the more general scenario models, also from Hans and Tina, is that considered in these models, or is it just something that we take will be fixed? Is it modeled in somehow also the challenge of balancing, you could say, load and production from renewables, which requires storage, of course?
Yeah, maybe I can start. So I try to be short. So first about the demand response. Yes, we are also modeling demand response, but those are different models. The challenge is, of course, that how to make that economically feasible. So that's we are having a lot of this more hourly based modeling where the demand response is included. But when we are doing the national impact assessments for considering EU policies and national policies, then we are using more like the full bottom-up energy system, macroeconomic, and also the sectoral models. So the demand response is not so much there. And the same counts also for the balancing. Of course, we have different models for markets, smart grids, and integration of renewables as a whole. But those are more related to the operational modeling. But when we are doing the scenario modeling, it's more about, I can give an example that when we are now doing the job for the Finnish government for carbon neutrality, I guess that we are having times VTT model for the greenhouse gases and energy systems. We are having a macroeconomic general equilibrium model. We are having equilibrium model for the agricultural sector. We are having a separate model for the forest sector, which looks at the supply of the Finnish forest raw material. We are having a LULUCF model integrated. We are having different models for waste sector, different models for other greenhouse gases, and then we are combining all these. So it's a huge effort, and we are having this kind of like a modeling framework to do the job. And then, of course, when we are having a different, we have also the buildings and transport models, sectoral models. But then it's always depends on the research question or the policy question, what kind of models we are using. And then when we are talking about sectoral integration, it's important. It's very important also have the balancing, the storage. It's very important to have the demand response analysis and the role of demand response. But then we are talking about different research questions. And these are not so much involved when we are doing the policy analysis.
Yeah. So maybe just very brief from my side. So in GENeSYS-MOD, it's on hourly basis and of course on aggregated level, but it takes into account several flexibility options. So this starts from dedicated storage, so any kind of storage devices. Then sector coupling is a strong, let's say, module and feature there, but also then transmission expansion. So these are all flexibility options. And finally, demand response, and again, depending on the storyline. So the more decentralized the system is, the more fine granulated. So the more need is to let's say, to breath with the system. And let's say the more centralized renewable technologies we assume, the less need for demand response is used. So therefore, the nuances, they are taken into account also in terms of demand response in the different scenarios, but of course, rather on aggregated level, but equally to several other flexibility options and sector coupling.
Thank you, Hans. Also, we are aiming towards the end, actually, because we would like kind of to have these 15, 20 minutes in the break room. And it's possible in the break room to go find something to eat, find a cup of coffee, or and then come back to the room actually, and then connect with others to keep on the discussion. But as a round off, I think I'll give the word first to Marlene and then to Sebastian for a few final words of this panel.
Thank you, and thanks for having had these insights from the different corners all around in research and development. For my point of view, talking now from a transmission system operator, we always want to have also the grid in this main focus. And what I want to place is, let's say, some end message for this discussion of, let's say, CO2 and targets for 2050. We will lose a lot of stable rotating machines when fading out from coal, from gas. And this will also limit our system in a way that TSOs need to take care of how to handle the system of 2040, 2050, when all of these units will not be there anymore, or just to a certain extent. And I just want to place it here at the end of this panel that from a system perspective, these thermal units were of very, very big importance. And we need to think of how to shift to these new technologies in order to enable stable grid operation also in the near future. Thanks.
Thank you. Sebastian?
Yeah, thank you very much. Also, again, from my side, I can say for our part, we are happy to continue this discussion and exchange to understand how the information from the scenarios can be best translated into implications for policy impact assessments. Maybe for my closing remarks, since we have been focusing now a lot on the let's say analytical part of scenarios, which is of course heavily linked to modeling, and I also think in fact the most relevant part for policy impact assessments. I would also like to point out that we also see scenarios to some extent playing a normative role by setting out visions of new pathways. Yeah, and I think we see that also in your work, and I think it's also important to that storylines that underpin scenarios can provide some aspirational visions. So which we actually then want to pursue through the modeling work. So just saying that scenarios kind of brings together all these dimensions. Yeah, the analytical work, but also some normative work. And with that, I leave it here from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Sebastian. And to me, that was wise last words. so thank you to the panel. And now Pedro wants to kind of instruct us on how to kind of move into the break and then be back again at 3 p.m. exactly for the continuation of the workshop. Pedro?
Yes, I think if you can show the slide on the break that we have prepared. So thanks for all the participants. I think we're gonna have now some minutes break, but we also leave the floor open for having a virtual coffee. And Peter is going to show a little bit this slide.
Just a moment.
Yeah. And then we will be back at 3. But meanwhile, we will keep this slide open there. And also now what you have to do is, of course, click the link on the chat. And what's going to happen is that you're going to go to a website. And in the website, you can create an avatar. And you will be able to continue this discussion with people from the audience, or people from the audience might reach you and have a chat in a table. So it's a really neat thing, very fun. But if you are really tired or want to stretch your leg and have a real break, and then go ahead and do that. Take a real break, but come back at 3. So you have these 2 options: virtual coffee or stretch your legs. Thank you.
Okay, time is 15:00. So we will be starting the second session, part 2, pathways realization from a macroeconomic perspective quite soon. So if I can ask the ones giving an intervention to kind of put on their cameras and demute, then we will soon be ready to go.
Yes.
It's the trick is that when you share your screen, you can't see who's online listening. But I will now stop sharing my screen, and Paulo, then you can just share your.
Sure.
Do you have a? It might be a trouble if you have a Mac, but if you have a PC,
no,
okay.
it's a PC. It's fine.
Yeah.
So let me just share the screen then.
Yeah. So then I'll just say the first presentation will be by Paolo Picella. Picella,
yeah, correct.
Yeah. So please go ahead.
Thank you. So I'll just reshare this. Oops, I have moved a little bit too much.
I can perfectly well see your screen. Yeah.
Which one are you looking at? The one with notes or the one with the?
No, just the full screen. Also,
okay, you can see cooperation in the European energy transition, right?
Yes.
Good. Okay, then. So good afternoon. I am Paolo Picella. I'm researcher at NTNU, at the Department of Industrial Economics and Technology Management. And my focus is on the evaluation of macroeconomic impact of green transition policies. I will present an economic evaluation of the effects of decarbonization in different European countries, considering the push provided by carbon prices, and on the other hand, the pull provided by technology development, as well as consumption development. So the work is still partially ongoing, but results come from a collaboration with my colleagues Torsten Burent from TU Berlin and Pedro Crespo del Granado from NTNU, which is here, is one of the organizers, so you know him quite well. So this is the outline of the presentation. I will introduce the motivation, then touch briefly on the models employed and their linkage. Then I will introduce the scenarios that we have developed for this exercise, which were devised, well, a word of warning here, the scenarios we have used were devised before the definition of the open entrance pathways. So they do not have all the features of these scenarios previously introduced. So I will introduce the scenario that we have for this exercise that we have made. Then I will briefly, then I will present results that we have out of it. So as we know, the plan is to decarbonize Europe by 2050. And some countries have in the past shown some sign of skepticism over the climate goals and mentioned that they would call off the agreement. Our question is then has been, one, what are the effects of a transition towards a cleaner economy for Europe? And two, what happens if there is a defection by a group of countries? So we have defined for these 4 scenarios based on 2 drivers. One is the level of decarbonization, and the other driver is the level of cooperation between countries. So some of the questions we might want to answer are considering, for example, if an increase in productivity for renewable sources is good enough or large enough to offset the lack of fossil fuels in the future. Or if the pull by the technology development is strong enough to cope with the push by the policy, which is mainly modeled as carbon budget. And also if the countries have the same effect from a decarbonization policy and why. So and if there is somebody who is calling off the agreements, is there any possible countermeasure? And economically analyze that. So what we have done is we have analyzed the problem by soft linking REMES EU and GENeSYS-MOD. REMES EU is a multi-country CGE model considering several types of fuels and the effect of CO2 budget into the economic system. It considers actually 28 countries, which is EU 27 minus Croatia, but including Switzerland and Norway. GENeSYS-MOD is one of the most used or mentioned models in this workshop. Is a bottom-up energy system model capable of computing the future mix of energy technology used by different sectors based on a global least cost approach and using a detailed technology representation. So this is how we have linked the models. GENeSYS-MOD provides a technology dynamics of basically the technology changes in terms of energy inputs that are requested by the different sectors, and also for final consumption. We can see it here, technology mix. I don't know if I can, pointer options, maybe I can laser pointer. So technology mix is passed from GENeSYS-MOD to REMES EU, and REMES EU computes an equilibrium between demand and supply as the technology and policy, so we have demand and supply of different commodities as the policy changes, and provides GENeSYS-MOD with the level of sectoral activity, with the CO2 prices, and with the electricity demand by sector. So another word of warning here is that we have been updating the models to keep improving the results until quite recently. Therefore, we haven't achieved yet a full convergence between the two models. Actually, we have made a couple of iterations among them. So the analysis in this regard can be viewed as an economic evaluation of the results provided by GENeSYS-MOD for the scenarios that we have defined, which are not the, stress it again, they're not exactly the scenarios that are defined in the openENTRANCE project, but somehow close. They were devised before the openENTRANCE scenarios were computed. So going on, one word also about the harmonization of the models. So we've been harmonizing there has been an harmonizing process between the inputs of different sectors, and it has been one of the most challenging activities since the databases are not using the same units. REMES uses monetary units, while GENeSYS-MOD database uses physical units. Sometimes there are commodities that are present in the social accounting metrics for the REMES model, for the CGE model, which are not featured in the technical data set from the energy system model. And on top of that, the percentage shares at the beginning are rather different. This is power, for example, 2005 from REMES, and so social accounting metrics, and this is the value that we receive from GENeSYS-MOD, and this is about physical quantity of power. So basically they have quite some differences, and they needed to be harmonized somehow. So we have used some methodology, like for example, if both the database have the commodity, then the change is applied from GENeSYS-MOD to REMES, and it's multiplicative, which means that it grows or decreases at the same rate, starting from the initial point. If REMES does not have the commodity at the beginning, then the change is additive. If GENeSYS-MOD doesn't have the commodity at the beginning, but it's in the social accounting metrics of REMES, then it's phased out only using only under the decarbonization scenario. And if we are speaking about fossil fuels, the fossil fuel is phased out. For example, I'm not sure if I can spot an example very fast here, but there are some of them. I guess diesel, for example, is not here at all in the GENeSYS-MOD, but it's here in REMES, and it's phased out. So these are the scenarios that we have devised based on these two drivers. So depending on the level of decarbonization and on the level of cooperation, we have 4 scenarios. In all the scenarios, we have an expansion of renewables sources, the power sector. In the business as usual scenario, so we have basically with no decarbonization or limited decarbonization, and then we have the decarbonization scenario. In the business as usual, we have low policy push, so there is not the carbon budget does not go much below today's level or 1990s level, with a higher, so their carbon budget is basically higher. While in the decarbonization policy case, we have a lower carbon budget. It goes down by 90% compared to 1990. Sorry. So which is not that different from 2005 anyway. Carbon budget are also, in this case, when there is no cooperation, the carbon budget, so if we go down here, the carbon budget is discarded for the Visegrad group in case of no cooperation. So it's they basically not having any carbon budget cap. So what we'll do, I'll focus on the business as usual scenario and compare it with the decarbonization scenario, and then touch briefly on what happens when there is no cooperation. So what are the assumptions in the macroeconomic model? These are the main assumptions. So we have CO2 allowances that need to purchase by every sector consuming fossil fuels. So we didn't make a difference between the sectors that are under the CO2 policy and the sectors that are not. But we are assuming that all of them using fossil fuels need to purchase CO2 allowances. CO2 budget is also defined per country. Technical change is an input from the energy system model, as I have shown a couple of slides ago. We have energy intensity improving over time, different per country. We don't model carbon intensity though. And the exports of hydrogen have the same structure in terms of percentages of the export of natural gas that we have today. Hydrogen will be active in the future, so we don't have yet a stable export system. Also, the renewable sources productivity increase, so the renewable power productivity increases by 6% every 5 years in the business as usual scenario. And this is taken from a recent paper by Eder and colleagues. It's a paper published in Empirica 2021, so Andreas Eder. Also, effects of COVID-19 are not modeled. So these are the differences between the business as usual and the decarbonization scenario. We have in terms of CO2 budget, we reduced the CO2 budget by 60% compared to 1990 in the business as usual, whereas we reduced it by 90% compared to 1990 in the decarbonization case. In both cases, we have the inclusion of a hydrogen sector. In both cases, we have a sort of transition towards hydrogen, biofuels, and electricity, but in the business as usual, it's much more mild compared to under the decarbonization case. In both cases, we have energy efficiency. The diffusion of renewables is modeled by an increase in productivity growth, as I said before, 6% every 5 years in the business as usual, and 10% every 5 years in the decarbonization. We assume that there is going to be, this is sort of a guesstimate here. Here, this is taken by a paper. This is sort of a guesstimate, assuming that there will be even a major improvement in technology for renewables. And at the end, also, we have extraction of fossil fuels, which is phased out in the decarbonization. Basically, we have a decrease of 50% extraction every 5 years. And here we have that in business as usual, we have that it doesn't increase. It stays at 2007, 2005 levels. So what are the macroeconomic effects? We move to the macroeconomic analysis. Still, these analyses are basically an economic evaluation of the system transition proposed by the bottom-up energy system model. The bottom-up energy system model provides the development, as I said before, of the technology mix, and the economic model evaluates the change in prices, consumption, and profitability. So since the point of first impact of the shocks are on the demand of energy commodities, we start from the development of this demand under the two scenarios with collaboration in this case. So we can observe that there is an overall decrease of energy consumption, and it depends on two factors. One, we have increasing energy efficiency, and two, the second driver is the carbon budget. So we have a decrease, or the decrease is also due to carbon budget, and in fact, we can see that the electricity gets a major, it's an increasing, let's say, presence in the mix, also in the business as usual. Also, it's due to the technology mix that changes, of course, with time. In the decarbonization case, the scenario, electricity, hydrogen, and biofuel basically take over mostly electricity. Then we have biofuels, and there is this slight amount of also of hydrogen that is covering the demand. We can also see, that natural gas is not completely phased out, still a little bit used, and also coal used a little bit. So what happens to emissions in the two cases? In the first case, we have a sort of a linear decrease. It's and of everything, and the proportion, yeah, it's pretty much similar for all of them. But we can see that industry here is not decreasing that much the consumption of fossil. Basically, it's still making emissions, so it's still consuming some fossil fuels. And this is even more clear here in case of decarbonization. We're decreasing a lot the emissions from different sources, but industry doesn't decrease them completely, or not as much as the others, at least at the other sectors. So we see that basically we know what is happening is due to the technology mix development, and industry does not completely get rid of natural gas, heavy distillate, and some other fuels. So this is due to the shift in technology mix. This is basically happening slowly compared to how much we want to decarbonize by policy. This means also that that industry will have to pay a big penalty in terms of CO2 allowances. So the takeaway of this drawing, of the graphs, is that if the push by the decarbonization policy by decreasing the carbon budget is stronger than the pull by the change in technology, there will be some consequences in terms of prices, in terms of, you know, taxes, carbon budget in this case, so CO2 prices. Also, to give an idea of the expenditure for CO2 allowances, this is the projected CO2 prices by the model. So in the decarbonization scenario, the CO2 price is more than 6 times the one in the business as usual scenario. And next, so also we have want to see what is the implication on the transition of this transition on energy prices. We see the business as usual here. This is for Germany, so I had to pick one country. I picked one that is quite large. So this is the case of business as usual. This is the case of decarbonization. We can see that in the business as usual, prices tend to decrease, and this is in proportion to the consumer price index, due to the energy efficiency, with the exception of heavy distillate, which is the green here, and electricity. So electricity price increases due to the increased usage in the industry, and well, there is a growth also in production because of the productivity that is increasing, but it's slower in the business as usual compared to the decarbonization case. Heavy distillate prices here, they increase because its production does not increase any longer, because we are fixing the extraction of fossil fuels at levels that were in 2005, for example. But it even grows by technology change in, for example, aluminium production. So in case of decarbonization, here there is a large increase of heavy distillate prices, because still the same reason, it's still used by industry and in aluminium, for example, but there is a huge decrease in extraction of fossil fuels with time. So this increases the prices of heavy distillate and also of fuels for the same reason. Electricity price in this case, it decreases because there is where is electricity? It's here, it's decreasing. We have a much larger, because we have a much larger diffusion of renewable, we have modeled a much larger diffusion of renewable sector by productivity. And also we can see that, where is it? Hydrogen, it's down here. So it also decreases because, well, with time, we have an initial small increase, but then it starts decreasing because basically hydrogen, it's not used as much as we could expect as a proposal from the bottom-up energy system model. So the proposal is not giving us a lot of usage of hydrogen, therefore the price decreases. Also, this decrease in price is an indication that the development proposed by the energy system model is not fast enough to accommodate for hydrogen-based energy. Of course, with more iterations, that as I said, we just had a couple of iterations. With more iterations, this might be adjusted, and the price of hydrogen might slightly increase because it will be more used in the system. So in this chart, I have considered the aggregated price per macro group of production inputs. So basically, this is not it's a price that is computed by macro groups. So we have an energy group, capital group, labor, and materials. So we have 4 macro groups, and these aggregates are different per sector and per country. Therefore, the prices might change from sector to sector for the same aggregate. Materials in industry is not the same as materials in services. So we can notice that in agriculture, there is a very high increase in price for energy. This is due to a large purchase of biofuels, and which is almost not produced at the beginning. But this is also a way of that. It also depends on the way that it has been modeled. The possibility of exchanging classical agricultural production with biofuels. So this is something that might change in future runs.
And Paolo, we are on overtime, so if you're approaching the end soon.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So basically, the end is I can jump to the conclusion directly. so it's a lot of things to say in 20 minutes. So basically, what is happening is that so the message I want to convey is that energy intensity improvement alongside CO2 budget reduction lead to a decrease in energy usage. So this is quantity variation is decreasing. Not all the sector managed to get rid of old fuels. Industry keeps using heavy distillate and other fuels. This makes it subject to high CO2 prices, and it reduces also it reduces the demand for capital, labor, and materials. Also, generally, sectors reduce the consumption of energy. And first, also prices for electricity and hydrogen decrease in the long run because of the supply that is increasing a lot. The reduction of demand for energy, also due to increased costs for CO2, reduces also the demand for labor capital compared to this is compared to the business as usual. So and of course this unfortunately leads to a decrease in value added for many sectors. So besides hydrogen and renewable power that are increasing. So basically the overall GDP slows its increase. So if I can show the GDP by country, and we have the business as usual, and then we have the carbonization case, it slows its decrease. And we might think, okay, is it possible to do something to what happens? So some countries might think, okay, let's call out the agreement and see what happens. So here there is a comparison of what happens in the business in the decarbonization. This is compared to the business as usual. Decarbonization with countries calling off. So we are talking about Visegrad countries. And in this case, what we do is we put tariffs to these countries to avoid to sort of retaliate some sort of we are not purchasing production from these countries from the Visegrad countries, and this could be like a countermeasure. What is shown is that it doesn't really work, because if we do this, if we remove this tariffs on imports from the Visegrad countries that we assume they're calling off the agreements, we are in a way not using any more fossil fuels, or the rest of Europe, Drupa 27 is not using any more fossil fuels, but they can be produced, which means that if we take away those tariffs, they will be selling, the rest of Europe will be selling, even so slightly, fossil fuels to this countries, and they will be producing at a lower price and selling it back. Therefore, the GDP will decrease for everyone because we have more exports to those countries. So there is a slight decrease in a slightly lower decrease in GDP, and actually for the Visegrad countries there is an increase. Yeah, it's just the emission in these two cases. We have way more emissions in, of course, in cooperation case than in the non-cooperation case. Yeah. So I went directly to the conclusions.
I know, but that's fine. Also, no questions so far in the chat. So I think we'll go straight to the second presentation so that we have enough time for the debate in the end.
Good.
The second presentation is by Dr. Panagiotis Flangkos. Please, you can share your presentation.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks, Peter, for the introduction. Thanks for inviting us to present here. Let me share. Can you see it?
Yes, I can see it.
So thanks. We can start. So I'm going to present about some new insights from the InnoPaths and Navigate projects, which are large modeling projects funded from Horizon 2020, focusing on the socioeconomic, industrial, and distributional impacts of decarbonization policies in the EU. So this work has been jointly done by GEMI3 team, which are listed here. Starting first, a brief outline. I'm going to present first the model that we use, which is the GEMI3 FIT model, one of the most widely used CGE models in the EU. I'm going to present some new methodological developments that we recently did in order to improve the transition to carbon neutrality. And then I'm going to present some recent applications towards assessing the macroeconomic impact of the EU Green Deal. Starting off, the GEMI3 model, probably you have heard of, but it's a global CGE model, commutable general equilibrium model, that provides details on the interactions between the economy, the energy system, and the environment. It is actually based on multi-regional, multi-sectoral modeling, so it captures around 50 regions and 50 commodities, 50 production sectors. As the model previously introduced, we use the nested production function, including capital, labor, energy, and materials, and of course, technical progress. A distinctive feature of the model is the equilibrium unemployment for labor market, because actually, commonly, let's say, traditionally, the CGE models model the perfect labor market where you do not have any unemployment. But of course, this is not a consistent picture of the reality, so we modified it by assuming equilibrium unemployment. We have the households where they provide labor, of course, to the markets, but also consume the goods. And I distinguish between durable goods and non-durable goods. For instance, durable goods, they're considered as private cars, while non-durable goods linked to durable, for instance, are oil products that households use to fuel their cars. Trade is endogenous in the model, so we have detailed bilateral trade among all regions in the model and all sectors, formulated based on the Armington assumption, by where we are implicitly assume that all goods are imperfect substitutes. Of course, the model GEMI3 has been widely used to simulate the impacts of various policy instruments, and in the last years, the main focus is on the energy and climate policy issues. Here's a brief structure of the model where you see the core elements of it and the basic modules, which are all interlinked together in order to form the so-called general equilibrium. So we have three different equilibriums in the three core markets: the capital market equilibrium, the labor market equilibrium, and the product market equilibrium. So all these actually define the general equilibrium in the entire economy. And then, of course, through endogenous bilateral trade modeling, we also project the equilibrium at the global scale. So there are a lot of factors that are actually going to influence what are the GDP impacts of decarbonization by country. And of course, this relates to the decarbonization measure that is used, for instance, if it's carbon pricing or some other instruments. The labor intensity of the clean energy technologies relative to fossil fuels that are substituted. What is the revenue recycling scheme for carbon revenues that is used? The core financing assumptions, because this is actually quite critical, because It is the models tend to show very, very different results depending on whether there is loan-based finance versus self-finance, because yeah, this can lead to the so-called crowding out effects, which are prevalent in CG models, actually showing very large negative impacts from decarbonization. Also, other factors like the availability of required skills and the trade position of a country, especially in terms of whether it is a net fossil fuel importer or exporter, also play a very important role. So the additional value of multi-sectoral CG is that they provide, let's say, a robust framework in order to represent all the above factors in a type of framework and capturing all their complex interactions. So this is why they are so much used in applied policy making. Recently, of course, you all know that there is this proposal by the Commission for the transformation to climate neutrality by mid-century as part of the European Green Deal. Of course, this will require transformative changes across the European economy, because all sectors have to be transformed, have to be restructured from a fossil fuel paradigm to a paradigm of increased renewable energy, energy efficiency, electrification, and also hydrogen uptake. So the entire economy has to change. And of course, this posed some very important considerations for conventional CG models, because this type of models cannot represent deep structural transformation, because they are very much based on CES functions, constant elasticity substitution functions, which are quite rigid in how they represent technology uptake, how they present these new clean vectors, clean fuels, clean energy vectors, etc. So we had to implement several modeling improvements in order to accurately show how the European economy can be transformed towards a low emission paradigm. First, we introduced technology progress, actually endogenizing how the model projects technology progress for clean energy technologies. And this depends on learning by doing and R&D expenditure. I'm gonna say a few words a bit later in the presentation. We also introduced detailed sub-modules for the energy system technologies, actually trying to improve how the model represents different power generation technologies, different types of car, for instance, electric vehicles or fuel cell vehicles, different types of boilers in households, etc. So we move beyond, let's say, conventional CES formulation, trying to, with the power of detailed sub-modules that can capture quite easily the specificities of each subsystem in order to implement the new deep decarbonization scenarios. And this, of course, we have also the option to make the detailed linking with energy system models, like discussed before. And for this, we use primes for European countries and Prometheus for non-EU countries. We also introduced an explicit representation of the financial sector. And recently, we have developed a satellite module which can identify multiple households in order to be able to account for distributional impacts of climate policies, which are one of the most important policy concerns towards decarbonization. And also, we have introduced the sectors that manufacture the low carbon technologies as separate industrial sectors. So moving on to the issue of learning, which is quite important. So why we have to include endogenous technology progress as part of the macroeconomic assessment? So conventionally, before this endogenous growth thing, decarbonization had some effects on the economy. These were triggered firstly by substitution of imported fuels, which are, at least in most European countries, we import fossil fuels, by products and services which are related, of course, to low carbon technologies, which are domestically produced. However, this progress tend to be costly in the short term, so it poses some additional cost to the households and the firms. And these price increases can lead to the so-called crowding out effects in industries, which reduces their competitiveness and of course has detrimental effects in GDP. So it leads to reduced GDP and competitiveness loss, as shown here. However, by introducing this endogenous learning, we can also show different effects, because the representation of how innovation can change the decarbonization process is quite critical in this, because for instance, the low carbon transition, of course, can provide opportunities for R&D, commercial uptake of clean energy technologies, which, especially in case that there is these are financially supported, this, of course, this learning can moderate the cost increase, especially in the longer term. So, if the EU domestically manages to domestically produce some of these low carbon technologies, for instance, wind turbines, that is currently work as a major player globally, it can also gain some competitive advantage. So by putting this in the overall picture that I've presented before, we saw, of course, that the impacts of decarbonization on GDP are not so high than we previously thought it would be. So the impacts can be small, for instance, or we can even have GDP gains in the longer term. So the net effect, of course, captures on how all these factors are interlinked with each other. So moving on to some applications of this framework, very recent ones. First of all, we use this improved GEMI3 model to assess what are the employment impacts of decarbonization for the EU. So here we see the changes in European jobs relative to a reference scenario. And of course, we see that the effects on the aggregate level are relatively small, because the increase is not higher than 1%, for instance, of total employment, but there are some large sectoral shifts which are induced by decarbonization. So in this way, decarbonization will have clear winners and clear losers in terms of sectors. On the one side, on the positive side, we see that domestic activity and jobs are going to increase in the construction sector, in the electricity sector, actually because of increased electrification, which is a crucial part of the decarbonization process, while additional jobs will also be created in clean energy manufacturing and also in the agriculture sector, because advanced biofuels can be produced also domestically, so giving a boost to this sector as well. Of course, the picture is quite different in the sectors that's gonna lose from this process, especially the fossil fuel supply sector. So all elements of the fossil fuel supply, from coal mining to oil extraction, oil refining, so all aspects of the fossil fuel supply sector is gonna lose. And also we see some reductions also in heavy industrial manufacturing. Moving on to the specific, to take a closer examination of the industrial impact. So what are the impacts for specific industries? And we see that especially in the left figure, we see especially that if the EU acts alone on decarbonization, so if it implements all this ambitious carbon neutrality transition, when non-EU regions do not move towards this direction, we see that there is an increasing risk of carbon leakage. So we have a relocation of energy-intensive and trade-exposed industries to non-EU countries. Especially the sectors that are face higher risks are the ones of metals, of non-metallic minerals, and chemical products, which are, let's say, the sectors that are most vulnerable to the transition. And also these sectors are now protected with anti-leakage measures by the Commission as well. And these plans are, of course, will continue in the future, especially because these sectors face the highest challenges. Then we examine what will be the impact of inserting a border carbon adjustment measure. This, on the one hand, has proven very effective in reducing the risk of relocation, as shown in the figure below, so it can protect domestic manufacturing activities, but on the other hand, can be negative for GDP. However, when we use all these revenues actually the ETS revenues and DCA revenues in order to finance low carbon R&D and social security contributions. This can be beneficial for the European economy and especially for the labor market. Another very recent application is the modeling of the distributional impact, GEMI3. I will not go into technical details here, but what we do is actually a soft link of the CG model, which has one household per country, with a bottom-up model, which separates 10 income deciles. So differentiating their income by source, their consumption and saving patterns. And this modeling framework enabled us to explore what will be the social impacts, because the impacts of decarbonization will not be felt the same by different income classes, but literature suggests that there are going to be regressive impacts for those classes that are for the low-income households. And we see here that this is true. So we see some negative impacts, which is mostly triggered because decarbonization will reduce the demand for lower skilled workforce, because jobs like the ones that require lower skill will decrease. So this can have some detrimental impacts on the social side. However, and this is the right graph, shows it that when we recycle ETS revenues as transfers to these households, as direct transfers, this of course can be a lot beneficial and increase the incomes for the poorest households. So the message from this is that ETS revenues can be used for different purposes and can be very, very important in order to alleviate the negative socioeconomic impacts of the transition. And the last, one of the last applications of the model is to explore the impacts of COVID and green recovery packages. So here we, in a very simple scenario setup, I mean, using basically the IA assumptions from the green recovery, also that they prepared last year, we see that when we implement these green recovery measures, the EU can further reduce CO2 emissions, so towards closing the gap with a new 55 GHG reduction target by 2030, while in parallel boosting GDP growth and creating new jobs. And these new jobs will be created especially in the construction sector, which is required especially for as part of the building renovation package and all these activities related to improving insulation in buildings, which is a sector that was also hit hard by COVID. So it is quite important to see that there is a clear possibility here to get back the jobs in a sector that was badly hit by COVID. And of course, all this, given that there is availability of low-cost loans for the agents, which are paid back later into the future. And with this, I go to the final slide.
We need to be closing now. Yeah,
yeah,
excellent.
Final slide. Yeah. So it's including some brief conclusions from the study. So we have shown that the transition to climate neutrality will have limited impacts on aggregate GDP employment in the EU, but because it is essentially because this will be based actually on transferring resources from one sector, from carbon-intensive sectors to sectors that are not carbon-intensive, but without, let's say, major impacts on the aggregate level. But of course, we'll have large sectoral shifts, as explained before, with the construction sector actually being one of the most important ones, especially related to building renovations. We saw that there are methodological advancements required in order to improve how CGE models and other macroeconomic models capture capture the impacts of deep decarbonization. And in this context, low-cost finance and enhanced low-carbon innovation can reduce the energy cost increases. And also, what is very, very important is the way to recycle the carbon revenues to the economy, because this can be used very effectively in order to create more jobs or to alleviate the negative social effects of decarbonization. So thank you. That's it from my side. Of course, open to any questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Panagiotis. As we did it in the first panel, we go also as we did not do it in the first panel, we had a short break in between. We go straight to the panel discussion now. And for the panel discussion, we say welcome to Hector Polit, Director of Cambridge Econometrics. The idea was that the floor is yours first in the panel discussions to give your statement and to comment on the presentations by the two previous contributors. Please, Hector.
Thank you.
Do you have a presentation, or do you want to take it just orally?
I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes or so.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. My name is Hector Polit. I'm the Chief Economist at Cambridge Econometrics, still active head of modelling at Cambridge Econometrics as well, though I'm known as quite skeptical of modelling and CGE modelling in particular. I think it's a very brave suggestion to have me here commenting. I think you could probably have given yourself a much easier ride by inviting somebody else. No, so I come from Cambridge and very much in the Cambridge tradition of economics and a more Keynesian background. I also look into evolutionary and complexity economics as well, which feeds into my thinking. I just want to talk about a few more general points about the modelling and the scenarios, because I only saw the results for the first time last night, so I'm not able to say too much specific on them. I wanted to start talking about uncertainty, which is quite a big issue in economics, and so where to start in all of this. I think just by admitting, which I'm sure the other panelists would do, that there is an awful lot that we don't know. To quote Keynes from 1937, when it comes to these things, we simply do not know. So this is the challenge for us as economists and as modelers as well. And one of the aims of models is to help us to look at this uncertainty. And sometimes the models can be used specifically for uncertainty through some kind of sensitivity analysis. Now, we didn't see any of that in the presentations, but I'm sure the modelers are very familiar with it. But I would say that's more talking about risk than uncertainty, sort of the known unknowns rather than the so-called unknown unknowns that are really there to trip us up in our planning. So yeah, why is this relevant? Talking about uncertainty, it feels a bit academic and a bit abstract, but it's really important when it comes to the modeling because it defines human behavior. So in the CGE modeling that we've seen, rational behavior coming straight from economics textbook is the standard approach. So it's assumed that all the agents within the models have perfect information, so they know everything that's going on around them, and they're able to make the best decisions to maximize profits, utilities, welfare in that way. Now, in reality, of course, there are huge gaps in knowledge. We just have to look at the debate on energy efficiency to see there are plenty of things that we could all do to make our homes more energy efficient, but either we don't know about them, we don't know how to go about it, we may not be able to get access to finance to do it. There are lots of things that stop the markets operating in the optimal manner. Now, I know the modelers are aware of this. I know Panagiotis at least even put on slides the limitations and the way the models need to advance, perhaps preempting what I was going to say. But we do have to accept that these things are reality. Next, uncertainty, technology. Of course, there's huge uncertainty about the way that technology will go. We have a broad idea that the more we invest in a particular technology, the cheaper it becomes through the learning rates. But we don't know how new technologies form. Any of the complexity school really has looked at this in much detail. And some of these could, in the time frame we're looking at, really affect what we see coming out the other end. When we make investment decisions, we need to think about the future. A lot of this discussion about decarbonisation is long-lived capital equipment, so 30, 40 years or even more into the future. We don't know what will happen to technology in that time. This is really core to the decarbonisation debate, because really the decarbonisation transition is about technologies. It's getting the right technologies out there, and in some senses economic models really aren't the right tools to look at this. We still want to know the economic effects. There's a lot of useful information, but we've got to get the technology right first. Now I also wanted to talk about finance, because technology and finance really closely linked. Finance is a huge issue for policymakers across Europe, because as we saw in the slides, a lot of investment has to be made, and that investment needs to be financed from somewhere. Now, investment is also good for the construction industry, which will create a lot of jobs, but the money to pay for that does have to come from either companies involved or from the financial system. Now, finance is really, or money and finance is really somewhere that the equilibrium-based models have struggled with, and we have put out reports that show that you could even get the opposite results. To think what how, at least in the Cambridge tradition, we would see the banking system work. So this is absolutely critical, and I know certainly in the case of GEMI3 a whole ton of work has been done in this area, simply because it is so central to the questions that we're looking at here. Now I should say that it's not many of the models here do have real problems, including in the IPCC, and we look forward to the chapter on finance that's coming up, because I think this is going to really lay out some of the things that are going on here, and what needs to be done about it. Really getting an accurate representation of finance in the models is absolutely critical. So yeah, just to summarize all these points, bringing it back around, because we're talking about policy here. So what do the policymakers want to get out of all of this? What do they need? I think the first thing is a bit on the policies as well. The decarbonisation paths are all well and good, but really the questions that policymakers are asking is how do we get there? What policies do we need to put in place? Now, really high carbon prices, I don't think is the answer to this. I mean, we need a mixture of regulatory policy, market-based instruments, technology, all of these things working together, and interaction between these policies is really what's going to make it happen. Now, the models, again, often struggle with a lot of this, so it's nowhere to look at in more detail. Impacts at the detailed level, as we just saw on Panagiotis' last slide, the macro level impacts, a little bit up, a little bit down, doesn't really matter that much. It's what goes on at a deeper level in sectors, in local areas, in local communities. This is what really policymakers need to know more about, and the models, and the more they can do on this, the better. Now, on the sectoral side here, there is much more agreement between the different modelling approaches, although we may find different macro level outcomes. At sectoral level, there's a lot more agreement between the different models and the different modelling approaches. The energy sector always loses, the construction sector always gains, supply chains benefits. So here, I think we can agree on a bit more than the other things. So yeah, to summarize, because I've pretty much used my time already, all models are work in progress. I don't think any of us would claim that our models are the finished deal, and that is because there is uncertainty, and there always will be. And to finish with another quote from Keynes, we're all economists. If economists could be seen to be as humble as dentists, and I don't want to be rude to dentists because they do a more important job than economists, but let's be aware of the uncertainty. Let's not make claims that are too grand, and let's engage in discussion both with each other and with the rest of the panel, and I look forward to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hector. I think I'll give the words to the other two presenters first, and then do you want to react or have some feedback immediately? Paolo?
Yes, thank you. I have a couple of remarks. Thank you very much for the ideas that you brought to the table, and yeah, and they are all very much agreeable, of course, and they also give an idea of what are the limitations of this model, which they have. I mean, models have limitations, and there is some work that can be done to improve them, and some limits that they still will be there. So starting from the first one, uncertainty. We don't know what's going to happen, and we don't know how agents are going to respond to a particular policy. So CG models are very much rough in analyzing what happens, for example, to consumption, because they normally stick a utility function to the overall households, and the model just assumes that the household will behave accordingly to this function, which obviously doesn't happen. Same goes for technology and technology advance, and also Panagiotis was talking about that in his presentation. The answer about these 2 points, or at least partially for me, it lies into the idea of linking models together. A model on its own is limited on some parts and has strengths on other parts. And for example, there are other models that would be modeling the behavior of both households and sectors in a way that is much more detailed, much more technology rich, for example, and that could be useful to be used as an input to models like CG models. Like, for example, CG models are not good at predicting anything. They won't predict anything. They just will give some direction of what are the connections between the different sectors. In this way, these models need to be calibrated somehow to a sort of a business as usual reference scenario. These scenarios can be provided, for example, by econometric models that are really good at forecasting. On the other hand, CG models will be good when it comes to analyze what if cases, if we, for example, include new technologies, which is quite easy to do in a CG model, basically defining the sectoral unit costs and an assumption of a unit revenue, and that will be a job that it can do. Of course, still it will not be predictions. It's not a crystal ball. It will never be. It's calibrated on 1 year, and of course that cannot give it predictory power. It's used to ask yourself the right questions, and these questions improve if the models are connected. So linking is one, I think, the possible answers to at least a couple of issues that have been raised right now.
Yeah, thank you, Panagiotis.
Thank you. And also thanks to Hector and Paolo for presenting very nice the bigger picture about macroeconomic modeling, essentially. Yeah, also a couple of comments. The first one, yeah, I think I will very much agree and try to reinforce also the point raised by Hector on that is not, let's say, the aggregate level that is important, but actually the lower level. So really the models are not that useful when they say some strange numbers about GDP or total consumption, but when they try to show the sectoral shifts on the one hand, so this is why we have to have a high granularity in terms of sectors, so the model should represent as many as possible, but also more regional stuff. I mean, because also the impacts will not be the same if you are, for instance, in a coal mining community, right? This, of course, will have very detrimental impacts from decarbonization, and of course, this will matter also when it comes to implementation of all these measures, because you cannot. And also with regard to the acceptance of climate policies by these groups, and also with regard to the acceptance, the other quite important issue is the issue of how the public, how the society actually thinks about decarbonization, and this, of course, has to do starting from the yellow vests movement, actually pointing towards that the middle and low income classes will pay a disproportionately high cost for fuels. So this also links quite well to the distributional aspects, right? I mean, especially for households that are low income, that cannot, for instance, get a cheap loan in order to renovate the house, to buy a new fancy electric vehicle, which is the case in at least most Eastern members of the European Union. So all these things have to be very, very carefully considered when we explore the macroeconomic impacts. And of course, impacts will also differ. Let's say when it comes to the labor market, we'll also see different impacts by skill. For instance, some occupations like coal miners or these types of occupations, of course, will most certainly lose from the transition. And then public policies have to be reinforced and implemented correctly in order to ensure that these people, I mean, are not forced into long-term unemployment, but are actually educated, they are trained properly, and in order, let's say, to transition also from a declining sector to a growing sector of the economy where actually they are needed. And yeah, and also, I mean, when it comes to finance, because we did a lot of work together with Hector on this, I mean, yeah, it's very, very important, finance, and it's actually a very, for me, it's a very interesting point because these two schools of macroeconomic models, when we have post-Keynesian versus neoclassical models, and have totally different assumptions about how markets operate and how investments can be financed. So on the one hand, we have strict crowding out, in the other, you have no crowding out. But it's very important how these modeling improvements in the last years, in order to improve the representation of finance, has led, let's say, to these models to look more comparable now. So they adopt common mechanisms to represent finance, and also the results seem to be towards the same direction, at least. Not, of course, the same, but they point towards the same broad conclusions.
Thank you. I have a question, actually. What I kind of hear is that there's no one model kind of giving the answer for what to do in order to kind of create this transition. And if you look at kind of what the Green Deal is saying, it says that we should tackle climate change at the same time as we should have a just transition. We should keep our welfare level, and we should ensure our security, also like security of supply, security as a society. So there's quite a set of you could say goals or measures to handle, and also, I kind of like to turn a little bit around the question to the panel. Also, the basic idea of, or one of the basics idea of openENTRANCE is to create this, you could say, common area for modelers and also and policymakers to play with each other. Also to have a big suite of models, also detailed models, overarching models, also macroeconomic, down to, you could say, detailed modeling of the transmission system, or kind of social issues in Eastern Europe. What would be your recommendation for how to kind of move forward, especially with respect to what type of modeling tools we should be sure to invite into this arena? Maybe Hector, do you want to start thinking about that?
Start. Yeah, happy to pass over to the others as well. And it's a really good question and important. And I suppose this is you could call it a gap in the science policy interface. And there is a gap here for sure. Now, policymakers are incredibly busy people, and modeling gets very technical very quickly. So there is a difference in language, and bridging that gap can be difficult. And perhaps one of the areas we lack in is in people who are there specifically to bridge that gap, who who are able to understand the technical details of the modeling, but relate it to the policymakers in ways that get across the key messages, ideally in a short period of time. So actually really getting down just to the nub of what the key issues are and how it relates to, again, finance, technology, and jobs, and which is what the policymakers ultimately care about the most. Yeah, I mean, right now it's difficult to get people together in any form. But I think within the European Commission, there is, I think there is a good interaction, and the Horizon 2020 program, or sorry, Horizon Europe program, and the way it interacts with the policy desk officers can be quite useful in this respect. But they will always say that there's space for more, but of course there are competing time constraints all around.
Please, Paolo or Panagiotis. You need to demute if you want to say something.
I already did. Yeah, also modeling wise, there is also a need for more sociological viewpoints, I think, in the transition, also for including fair and just transition, what's going to happen in terms of behavioral aspects. So other, definitely sociological modeling should be also included in a platform, besides different economical sector like the financial sector that is not always modeled. Basically, I see that in the economic evaluation of while when it comes to energy modeling, we have many different models operating around a platform. Well, economic-wise, we normally just use either CG or macroeconometric models, and maybe there should be also a plurality of these models that cooperate together.
Panagiotis.
Yeah, thanks for. I mean, the question, of course, is always pretty relevant. I mean, how to approach policymakers. I mean, starting from what Paolo just said, most on the modeling side first. Yeah, I mean, a good way to try to bring all this together is if you gather through an invitation all the macroeconomic modeling efforts in other Horizon 2020 projects. I mean, for instance, in Navigate, we are now doing the first multi-model comparison paper using CGs. Not only CGs, but also macroeconometric models. I mean, multi-sectoral models. So a type of MP, but on the economic side. Okay, so this is first very, very important thing, that not try to reinvent everything, but try to stand, to build on what other projects have achieved or are achieving right now, because this is also an ongoing project. And second, with regard to the policymakers, I think it's always tricky to approach them. In this respect, I will agree with Hector. That's very brief message, very directed, in a very easy to communicate language are always very important. And I mean, from my experience, at least, what is already helps is to talk about stuff that it matters for them, right? Because in most times they do not care a lot about some variables like technology uptake, for instance, but on the other hand, they care a lot about jobs and domestic jobs, not jobs created elsewhere in the world. So jobs is a very, very important aspect. The other is, for instance, industrial competitiveness, because they want to be to stay part in the game, and they want to keep the industries inside Europe and not relocate to outside. So yeah, we should use terminology that's relevant to them. This is the critical aspect, I think.
No, also I have a comment myself, and a last question actually. Also, I spent a year in London working on North Sea transmission system planning actually, and what we actually found out when we used kind of a socio-economic, techno-economic approach was that it's impossible. So it was obvious that it was a socio-economic, you could say, advantage to have one transmission system serving the North Sea. but without a cost-benefit sharing analysis between all the partners involved, nobody wanted to touch it. It was kind of too risky because they did not kind of have an idea on how the cost-benefit would be shared in the end. But that was not my last question. Just a short round on also what I see, at least what we see in Norway now, is that the new taxonomy related to the finance sector, as Hector said, was or will be really important, has kind of raised the finance sector to the battle, kind of. They are really wondering what will happen when it comes to this and how much influence it will have. Just a short round, you think it'll mean a lot, or do you think it'll mean nothing? Hector, Paolo, Panagiotis in that, if you want to comment. Paolo, maybe you can start. It seems like Hector has.
I've lost track. What was the question again?
No, also the EU taxonomy when it comes to finance. Mm-hmm. Also, what effect do you think that will have? Do you think it will make a big impact on green investments or not?
The financing that has been devised?
Yeah, the taxonomy that is kind of put in place now, which kind of says that green investments should, also meaning that green investments should see cheaper money than black investments actually.
Well, I haven't had the analysis of that, but I think it will. So I don't have strong feelings about that. So
yeah. Panagiotis.
Yeah, also I haven't seen the detailed analysis, but I mean, our modeling always says that if low-cost money is provided to green investment, then of course this can be a lot beneficial for the economy also, but also for the environment. And also how fast all the technologies are ramped up. How fast the household transition to efficiency or to buying an electric car. So yeah, in principle, I think that if implemented correctly, and of course, always there is the issue of small technicalities that, of course, in all these regulations play a role. But if it's implemented correctly, and I think this can make a very big. This is a very big step towards greening all the investment landscape in the EU.
Yeah, I would say necessary but not sufficient, probably is the answer. Getting the prices right is important, but the technology, the infrastructure, and everything that goes around it has to be there as well. So it's just one arrow in the bow, let's say.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you to presenters panel. We are somewhat on overtime, but not too much. I think this has been very interesting. It's possible to stay on for 20 minutes, half an hour, and to kind of walk around in an avatar type of space. To chase somebody to talk to and discuss with afterwards. I'll just kind of close the workshop with a few words before we go to the avatar space. I'd like to thank everybody for contributions today. I think the discussions have been really interesting, and seen from the openENTRANCE project part. At least I think it's been a good step on the way, because what we aim to do is to provide a platform for, you could say, sharing details on modeling and discussing with policymakers, also primarily the results, in order to kind of again create even better policy questions for the modelers to play around with. And I see that we really kind of should invite more modeling tools into this arena, because how fast the technology develops is really important. How the financial, you could say, tools are sharpened is also important. So, so this has been a step on the way, and what we plan to do is certainly to have more steps, create more workshops, invite more modeling tools into the platform, so that we can have a broader view of what would be the most efficient and best way to 2050 and no emissions. So thank you, and then I'll give the word to Pedro to guide us who want to into the avatar space.
Thank you. So yeah, so as we did for the previous break, we now will have a more spontaneous discussion and chat. And I would suggest that, as you can see in the slide, basically now we have an open chat. So we have some tables, virtual tables and virtual